Tuesday, January 17th. I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Winooski City Council. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Deputy Mayor Jim Duncan.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Agenda review. Any concerns about the order this evening? No. Okay. Next up is public comment. So public comment is meant for anything that is not related to an item on the agenda. If you're here for something on tonight's agenda, please hold for that. I'm going to open it up first to the folks in the room. I know you guys have a topic. Do you want to come up and introduce yourselves?
Right.
And then, Paul, can we bring Levi over on Zoom?
I believe, first of all, I'm Thomas. I'm a resident of Winooski in the Pine Grove Terrace area. We have a fellow member, I think might be on Zoom, Levi Cornell, who would like to also make a comment regarding this. So he has something to read that he wanted to provide. I don't know if he's on there or not.
Levi, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, here he is.
Can we let Levi read it first?
Sure.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Levi Bonnell. I'm the Vice President of the Pine Grove Terrace Homeowners Association, and I'm here this evening with the other boards, as you just met, as well as several other members on our street attending via Zoom. And thanks for the opportunity to speak. Very briefly, Pine Grove Terrace Homeowners Association is a collective of 22 households in the northwest corner of the city. It was built in around 1988, and the association was created for the sole purpose of managing a sewer pump station that transports waste from one city sewage pipe at the bottom of our neighborhood to a main sewage pipe on North Street. The association has been diligently managing the station for 30 years, making significant financial investments in infrastructure, new pumps, electronic alert systems, etc. On June 26th, 2022, a neighbor alerted our association of a foul odor radiating from the pump station along a sinkhole in the middle of the cul-de-sac. We immediately contacted Winooski City Hall for guidance. The city officials designated that we were the responsible party for the repairs. Although we disagreed with the city's assessment, we took action to prevent a major environmental incident involving the local waterways, recommended by the city and the EPA. A contractor was hired by us to fix the cracked pipe and sinkhole, and the updated system, after being fixed, was deemed acceptable by these entities, resolving any further environmental concerns. Recently, our HOA and the Winooski City Manager reviewed the city deed and land rights recorded by the city clerk's office and found the language in the binding protective covenants for our development dated June 1st, 1988, stated that the HOA is responsible for maintaining the sewer pump station only. The sinkhole was created by a break in the sewer pipe greater than 10 feet from the pump station under a city roadway and city property. In light of this information, the HOA, us, requested a meeting with the city officials to discuss restitution for the repair. The association met with Elaine Wang on August 11th, 22 to discuss the repair and possibilities for rectification. We proposed two options: the city take over the pump station or reimbursement for the repair of the expense. In the former instance, the HOA would not seek reimbursement for city-related repair expenses. It was almost 10 grand. And the HOA would relinquish its current reserves to the city. This would allow dissolution of the HOA. On November 3rd, 22, Elaine responded to the HOA that the city would not take over the pump station in its current status, and that the city would be open to the idea if it were modernized. We are currently pursuing this avenue, having just placed a deposit yesterday for $22,000 worth of work with a contractor. We then requested a meeting to discuss next steps and reimbursements for repairs. This past Friday, Elaine responded to the HOA that the city would not take over the pump station in its current status, and that the city would be open to the idea if it were modernized, like I said. This past Friday, Elaine responded to the association that the city would not recognize responsibility for the broken pipe, which we interpreted as prescribing our responsibility much greater than described in the protective covenant, and putting our whole community at risk. The city's position is that the pipes that leave the pump station travel hundreds of yards under city roadways and private property are the responsibility of the HOA, and we disagree with this. It should be noted that another collapsed pipe for water runoff occurred just up the road on Pine Grove Terrace with a similar root cause and circumstance, and this repair was done by the city. Furthermore, we believe the root cause for these breakages are caused by heavy machinery and vehicles used to maintain and service city property, including the detention pond. While it is the association's goal to dissolve and hand over the pump station to the city, we have a responsibility to maintain and safeguard it. In doing so, we have committed to making significant upgrades in the coming months, modernizing the infrastructure, purchasing a new pump, installing a new cover, etc. That's going to cost upwards of 30 grand this winter. We collected a special assessment on our residents to help pay for the upgrades. So tonight, we come before the City Council to formally request to be put on the next City Council meeting agenda to discuss the aforementioned issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Levi. Did you gentlemen want to add anything additional?
Only that Levi clearly spelled out everything pretty well. We have worked with the city manager in a positive way, the best we could with the time frames that we both have. City manager being very new to this community and having a lot of responsibilities. We recognize that. However, it's a timely issue for us, but it gave us time to work with Waterways Superintendent, who's been very informative and supportive of what we might need to do as an association to better place ourselves with the sewer system, with the pump station. Not to mention that when we had the leak, he right away gave us advice and consultation and reviewed our construction contract, so we were all in agreement how properly to repair that leakage. So whether it's disputed who owns that or who's responsible for that, we felt the guidance from the city was very positive, and we worked towards that. We also like to thank the city clerk, as the city manager recommended the night we met with the city manager, that we moved right into the clerk's office, took a considerable amount of time to review the deeds and find what we needed and respond to what the city manager's requests were for that information. So we think we resolved that part of it for discovery. So I think we're in a good place. We've just been hoping to maybe sooner than later meet with the city councils because one of the options was the city manager said if the city council voted on this, what her recommendations would be. And we've looked at that and said, well, maybe as an association, we will try to meet those recommendations in good faith. And that's what we've been doing since. But in other words, early conversations before the meeting suggested that the city manager was going to make a recommendation to the city council to be put on the agenda when possible. We support that. We hope for that to occur, and appreciate the openness in regards to this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything, Elaine?
Not at this time.
Okay. Well, since it's public comment, we won't do any decision-making tonight, but I appreciate you guys and Levi coming to give us more details. Elaine and I will chat tomorrow, and we'll follow up with you on next steps.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Nice
you.
to meet everybody.
Yeah, thank you for
Thanks so
coming
much.
in.
Thank you.
Okay, we are still in the public comment phase. If you're here for the Just Cause Eviction charter change or the sidewalk changes, and you can wait until we reach that item in the agenda, please do. Is anyone here for something not on tonight's agenda? Okay, anyone in Zoom? You can use the chat or raise hand feature. Okay. So we will move on to our consent agenda. Then we have council reports, city updates. Should be fairly quick, and then we'll get into tonight's actual content. So for consent agenda, we have our city council minutes from January 3rd and liquor control from January 9 and council. And then the payroll and payable warrants and our annual transportation highway certification. Any questions about consent agenda items? Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by Brent, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Council reports. Aurora, would you like to start?
Sure. So on last Thursday, we had a special meeting of the Inclusion and Belonging Commission. At that meeting, the primary items that were timely and why we wanted to have a special meeting on an off month was to discuss items related to town meeting day. So first, we reviewed how the city budget might be shared with residents and kind of how to explain that in a way that would give residents what they need to make an informed vote. And the commission then reviewed a draft information sheet for this, from the city around the just cause eviction charter change and provided some input on ways to improve readability and accessibility of the document. We also had on our agenda to discuss the equity audit further, but that was tabled until we could spend a whole meeting on it. The next regular meeting for Inclusion and Belonging is February 9th and at 6 p.m. And also coming up, we have the Safe, Healthy, Connected People Commission, and that will be on February 14th.
Thank you.
I believe there's a CCRPC meeting tomorrow, late afternoon. So the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission is seeking project recommendations. It's something I shared with council. Just happened to notice that in a public notice seeking projects. So an opportunity for the community to participate on that public hearing if they choose. We also have an infrastructure meeting on Thursday, the 19th. That'll be at the Winooski Pool Community Room. The agenda items are to go over our work plan and to go over officer roles. So looking forward to that meeting. And then another general announcement, the Green Mountain Transit has appointed their next general manager. So if anybody's interested in that, we can potentially get an update from Austin.
He might be coming in.
Okay, great.
Future meeting.
Great. Even
We've
better.
invited, we'll see.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that's-
Two quick updates from me. I joined other Vermont mayors from the Mayor's Coalition on Friday and released a shared legislative agenda, which was informed by the work that we did as council, prioritizing actions on housing for the state legislature. And Planning Commission met last week to continue their discussion about creating incentives for historic preservation. That work continues. Parking is part of that, so parking reductions for historic preservation and affordable housing are under consideration. That's it for me. Jim?
So the Airport Commission meets tomorrow at 4 p.m. This will be the first time I'm joining that body as the appointed member, so I'm looking forward to getting involved in that. And on Thursday, we have a pretty substantial housing commission meeting, looking at the housing chapter in our ordinances and talking about housing quality and minimum housing standards. So it should be a good working meeting on some much needed upgrades to be done there. So I look forward to that. That's at 6 o'clock on Thursday, and it's planned to be a 3-hour meeting, so it'll be a longer one. And those are all my updates.
I will make it quick. A meeting with Downtown Winooski tomorrow, so I don't have anything to update.
Okay. Elaine, city updates.
Yes, as you know, we're continuing the fiscal year 2024 budget meetings tonight with the overall budget discussion. City Council will vote on the final proposed budget on next Monday, the 23rd. After that, we'll have a joint city and school budget presentation, and a community dinner is planned on February 9th as part of that presentation, thanks to Winooski Partnership for Prevention. There will be another joint city and school budget presentation that will be held virtually to be date to be announced to hopefully increase access for the community to hear about the budget, proposed budget that we'll be voting on. A recorded presentation from myself and the mayor should be available on our website after February 10th. And the annual meeting held at the school district on the night before town meeting day. Town meeting day is March 7th, and the presentation will be March 6th. So if you have questions, feel free to call or email. The phone number is 802-655-6410, or you can email us at budget@winooskivt.gov. And you can also reach out to any city councilor or staff, and you can find the contact information at winooskivt.gov/contact. Speaking of town meeting day, if you're interested in running for local office on town meeting day, note the deadline to file paperwork is 5 p.m. on Monday, January 30. There are 2 city council seats up for election and 3 school district seats up for election. The 2 city council seats are for 2-year terms. The school district seats are the treasurer for a 3-year term and 2 school district trustee seats, one for a 3-year term and the other for a 2-year term. To appear on the ballot, you must be a Winooski resident and file a consent of candidate form and a petition with a minimum of 30 signatures. These need to be filed with the city clerk's office, again, by 5 p.m. January 30. If you have any questions about this, you feel free to contact the city clerk's office. The city clerk is right here if you haven't met Jenny Willingham before. And you can contact them again at 655-6410 or clerk@winooskivt.gov. Or you can come into City Hall at 27 West Allen Street. If you need COVID-19 test kits, they are available for free here at City Hall, the library, and the senior center during regular hours. The City of Winooski was sent a press release today by the Vermont Air National Guard, who will be performing night flying from Tuesday, January 17 to Friday, January 20, and from Tuesday, January 24 to Friday, January 27, with 2 takeoff and landing periods scheduled between 1 p.m. and 8 p.m. There are no scheduled morning flights. Their press release was shared on our city channels if you're looking for those details again. And finally, a blood drive will be held at the Winooski Senior Center this Friday from 12 to 5:15 p.m. All blood types are accepted, but the American Red Cross of Northern New England is in great need of type O donations. To sign up, please see news updates section at our website at winooskivt.gov.
Thank you. All right, we'll get into our regular items then. So first up is the Just Cause Eviction Charter Change timeline issue. We'll have, Elaine, we'll have you walk us through the situation. Council will have time for clarifying questions, then I'll open it to public comment, and then we'll do our decision making.
Thank you. So mostly from my cover sheet, just saying that to council. So in December, the city clerk accepted a voter-backed charter change petition that would empower council to pass a just cause eviction ordinance. After your January 3rd meeting, staff found out that unfortunately, we are inadvertently out of compliance with state law on the timeline for responding to the petition. By state statute, not only does the first hearing on the voter-backed petition or voter-backed charter change have to be held more than 30 days before the vote, which we were aware of, it must also be warned 30 to 40 days in advance of the hearing date, which is something we had overlooked. So at your January 3rd meeting, I should have advised you to warn the first hearing for between February 2nd and February 12th. But as you'll recall, the hearings on my advice were set for January 26th and February 4th. So that first meeting is the problem. Staff had consulted with VLCT Municipal Assistance Center attorneys. Vermont League of Cities and Towns advises towns across the state about any municipal legal matters and best practice. We also consulted the city attorney. The city attorney has some more work to do, but does still have his recommendation lined up with the one that I had in your memo, just as a spoiler alert. So there are 2 types of options, essentially, on when to hold the vote. To hold the vote on March 7th, 2023, as planned, or hold the vote later. So from what I've heard, holding the vote on March 7 is what the Winooski voting public is expecting. You can, of course, hear from the many folks who are probably here today to comment on that. That would require a validation vote sometime after that election on March 7. We haven't yet found out that the statute states when validation votes must be held or what would happen if the validation vote were to fail. We will keep you updated on what's advisable. If it's a special date for, or a special election for that validation vote, we estimate the expense to maybe be around $3,000. It's possible we could have the validation vote at next year's town meeting, in which case it would not be extra cost. It might be confusing to voters if it was that late from that far removed from the original vote. So that's the option, pros and cons as we can discover them for a March 7th vote. The other types of options are to hold it later. So there's 3 ways to do that. 2 were noted in your packet for today. So one option is to hold it at next town meeting, that's 2024, which is a long time from now, or to hold it at a special meeting just for this item sometime this year. The major drawback to this is the likelihood for a low voter turnout. A third option noted by Councillor Oakleaf over the weekend is that we could delay town meeting day, all the items that we anticipated for that ballot item. So we did a little homework on that today, and current pros and cons that we can think of include, as Councillor Oakleaf noted, Council doesn't currently have this authority, but could if House Bill number 42 becomes law in time. So assuming that's fine, you don't have to worry about the authority piece. We don't know when and if it would become law, so we would need Council to be prepared to vote on the town meeting warning, which includes the date of the election. That would need to be warned between January 26th and February 5th. So you would need to either decide next week at your regular meeting or set a special meeting date before your next scheduled one of February 6th, where you can warn that meeting. Apologies for all of the calendar math involved here. So note going with this option would likely mean people currently in office and not running again would need to serve until the vote. And there's also the school votes to consider for positions and budget. It might impact when the school can accept $2 million in federal funds, but it might not. So that's not sure that that's really something that you would need to be worried about. The main drawback to this option is that it tightens the time frame that either the city or the school would have to respond if either of our votes failed, because we have to have a budget in place by July 1. Or we're just extending our current budget year into the next, at least for the city perspective. I actually haven't looked at the school charter about that. So also holding it later this year might pose some staffing challenges. We have some non-negotiable medical outages that will happen soon after the March 7th date. So again, the 2 types of options are to hold the vote as planned or hold the vote later. Those options include next year's town meeting as a special meeting this year, or with all of the articles delayed to a later time. So given all the pros and cons and a bit of uncertainty, my recommendation is to continue with the March 7th vote. And if you have any questions, I'll take them or can go on with your plan.
Any questions from council?
I think I have a question. I think I agree with having it held on March 7th. I think another item to consider too is that my understanding is this would be an item that all residents can vote on. And I just want to make sure that feels like holding it as expected would give the best amount of chance for voters to understand and be able to get the information they need.
I don't know how to answer that second part definitively, but I'll just confirm that yes, the city attorney's advice is also that, in his opinion, all Winooski residents would be able to vote on this, because it's essentially an advisory to the state. So that's how it's a local matter and not a state matter yet.
Right, gotcha. And on March 5th, that town meeting day has state and federal?
You mean March 7th?
March 5th, 2024.
Oh, I'm sorry, the 2024. I don't think so.
Okay.
Jenny's shaking her head.
It's the presidential primary.
Oh.
That would be held on that.
That's right.
So that was my thought, not wanting to, because that would not, all residents couldn't vote on that, or non-citizen residents couldn't vote on that, so that would probably be an extra burden on staff and confusing for our residents to wait until next town meeting day.
There certainly was extra process in November this time when the general was held, or the midterms were held, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that would happen either way,
Yeah.
because we'd have we'd have
That would
city
happen.
items and state and federal items, so we'll have 2 ballots no matter what during that March
Gotcha.
24 election. But I still am fully in favor of holding it this town meeting day.
Elaine, can you confirm what date we noticed the 2 meetings?
We let's see, we posted on the 4th, is that right? I mean, what do you call it? You set them on the 3rd, so we noticed them probably on the 4th or the 5th. So it's, when we noticed them and the date of the first hearing, that had to be 30 to 40 days.
Right, so I was looking into it and I only see it posted on the 10th. So I just want to confirm the actual date that it was posted. Because if.
Where did you see it posted?
That was on our websites, I believe, and on Front Porch Forum. So in which case.
That could be too,
So
yeah.
confirming that,
Yeah.
wanting to make sure we confirm that. If it was later than January 4th, then we wouldn't be within the 30-day window for a February 4th meeting either. So the 26th as well as the 4th
Oh,
might be
the 4th
invalid
could-
dates, depending on the date that we actually posted those hearings.
Oh, are you saying that the 4th could have been the first hearing?
Correct.
I see, yeah. I mean, if you saw it on the, I don't know. Paul, do you remember when we first posted that?
The news update announcing the public hearings for January 26th and for February 4th went out on January 10th.
Okay, so that was my,
So both
I
dates would
misrecollected.
be invalid.
yes, the 10th to the 4th does not seem like that would be 30 days. It was not, yeah.
So do we need to set new dates for both the hearings?
So the recommendation that I have from the city attorney is to proceed with the plan, meaning have them on the 26th, because then there's one error, right, at the beginning of that. Everything else would be legal,
Okay.
as opposed to trying to reset it now. We've already noticed them in anticipation that people were expecting that and that we'd already warned them. So we'd post it on the website and the social media channels, and then Jenny and I were debating whether or not to pull the 7 days ad, because that was another point where we could have drawn it back, but it was already out. And so by the time we were discussing what to do, it was already out. So that's why it seems more sensible to just keep the same dates.
And I don't believe there's a legal way to post at this point because we need to be 30 days before the vote.
Right, it'd
And
be-
30 days
yeah.
of warning, which would put us
That's right,
at February
yeah.
16th and not March 7th. So there's no real,
Well, there is, but.
if we don't have it on March 7th,
Right.
yeah.
That's
Did
right,
you-
yeah.
I was just
Something?
waiting to see if people were done. So, Elaine, I'm wondering, if we have the vote on March 7th, it passes, could we then be subject to somebody who opposes JCE suing the city and using the fact that we didn't abide by our hearing guidelines?
Yes. Let me think about that. The attorney and I talked about it briefly today. So the reason why I put in the memo that he advises that it is a little risk option to have it on the 7th is because this is essentially an advisory vote to the state. Because the state sets, for those of you who aren't aware, the state sets all of our charters. So the authority all comes from the state. So we're not actually passing it here. We would just be saying to the state, the city voted this way or that way. So given that, his opinion, again, not sure, we could still be sued. We'd still have to go through it, even if there wasn't found to be a basis. But I think his point is, since it's essentially an advisory vote,
Okay.
there's,
So any
a
lawsuit
lawsuit
might be
wouldn't
on the
have much
legislature.
effect, I think was his
Okay.
advice, yeah.
And then as far as the validation vote, for the second vote, do those numbers have to match up with the first vote?
My understanding is it's just yes or no, and Jenny's nodding too.
Another simple majority.
Right, yeah. It would just
'Cause-
pass the way anything else would
Okay,
pass.
because like the turnout for the validation vote would be substantially less.
Yeah.
So I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that that wouldn't affect anything.
Assuming as it was a special.
Which we need to find out what the timing requirement is to go ahead and decide when we would have that.
Right, and I would say, in the statute, it does not get to that level of detail, probably because this hasn't happened that many times.
Yeah, I'm all for a March 7th vote as long as those two questions I have remain what we think they are.
Yeah, and unfortunately,
Let's
I've,
do something that's going to subject us to a legal case. If we could just delay it to a couple weeks later.
yeah, and unfortunately, I put you in this position where we're, as Councilor Oakley put it, you're choosing between not great choices because we're already out of compliance. But of those, I do think the March 7th is the least risky.
I support it too. I don't support special elections. I don't think anyone turns out for them, and it's too hard to tell people that they're happening, so.
Town meeting day warning also went out in the water bills, so
Yeah,
we're already started advertising March 7th. Definitely.
yeah. I also am not generally a fan of moving the date that people expect already.
Yeah.
Are there any clarifying questions? Should we move to public comment? All right, did anyone want to speak on this item today? You want to join us up here at the microphone, please? And then for anyone who does speak, just please introduce, state your name and town of residence.
So my name is Tom Proctor. I'm the Housing Justice Organiser for Rights and Democracy, in big part of this Winooski Just Cause Eviction push. I live in Burlington, but have a lot of activist friends who obviously live in Winooski and have done a great deal to try and get this onto the ballot. For my public comment tonight, I'm actually going to read a letter sent by Senator Tanya Verhofsky, who represents Winooski, regarding this, as she's not able to be present this evening because of scheduling issues. So, good evening, Winooski City Council, Mayor Lott and City Manager Wang. I am writing to you today as one of the state senators representing Winooski, a long-time housing advocate and the only tenant to currently sit in the Vermont State Senate. In the past few days, I've been concerned about messages that I've received from my constituents regarding the actions of the City Council, Mayor and Town Manager in regards to the Just Cause Eviction Charter Change proposal. Constituents have reported that Winooski City Council and the Mayor of Winooski are considering pushing back the Charter Change vote that was successfully petitioned weeks ago, and to me this is not good democracy. I'm aware that the City Council scheduled the public meetings for this ballot initiative weeks after they could have done so, and this has jeopardised this voter-driven tenant protection initiative. As a leading advocate for just cause eviction in and out of the State House, I urge you to place this charter measure on the 2023 town meeting day ballot without delay. Holding this vote back due to the city's error weakens civic engagement and ignores the will of the people in Winooski and their voice demanding adequate tenant protections. I need not remind you that 65% of Winooski residents rent their homes, and it was just last year that dozens of new Americans faced mass eviction through no cause that was only reversed by a strong response from the citizens of the city. By delaying this vote, you postpone their right to vote on tenant protections and could potentially put hundreds of more citizens in danger of being evicted in the interim. Citizens that by and large will be statistically more likely to be from marginalised communities. In the last legislative session, we heard from former Winooski resident, a disabled woman that was no cause evicted from their apartment for having the temerity to ask for federally required accommodations from her landlord. We also heard from a sitting legislator that was no cause evicted from her home and spent months being homeless while she tried to secure housing. The longer you wait on having this vote, the more of these incidents will occur. And in the current state of the housing crisis, we need to act quickly to provide any and all protections that we are able. If the Winooski voters approve this message, I will fight for them in the State House to be sure their voices are heard and upheld. And I urge you to fight for them at the municipal level by putting just cause eviction on the 2023 March 7th ballot. Sincerely, Senator Tanya Vyhovsky, Chittenden Central District. So I just echo what Tanya said. I think she's a fantastic advocate in the State House. And it sounds like the recommendation will be March 7th of this year, and I encourage you to all vote that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room who wishes to speak? I'll move to Zoom after we do the in-persons. Come on up.
Hello, my name's Megan. I'm a resident of Winooski. I've lived here for about 7 years and I am a renter. I just wanted to echo the recommendation of the city manager, which would be to go ahead with the vote on March 7th. I'm one of the people who signed the petition and talked to a lot of my neighbors in town about signing as well and about just cause eviction. And I can tell you that many of us who rent in Winooski are very afraid of losing our secure and stable housing and our ability to continue living in a community that we're all a part of. And this is one really bare minimum protection that helps us feel a little bit more secure in continuing to live and work and contribute to the community here. And I just also want to echo that, you know, on the pro and cons list from the memo that you read, you know, it doesn't include anywhere that one of the biggest cons is going to be that people will have more no-cause evictions if this is delayed. And that is a very real fear for like a basic need for many of us in the community. So I just want you to think about that and go through with the vote as planned on March 7th. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. That's a fair point, what was left out of like the cons of delay. I do just want to make sure everyone understands that even if voters say yes to this at town meeting day, it has to go through the state legislature at their timeline, so it wouldn't just take effect, but.
I do.
I just want to
know
make
that,
sure
but
everyone knows about
yeah,
that. Yeah,
to move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to come up?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Siegfried Boyd-Isidro-Cladas, resident of Winooski. Not a long-time resident, new, and I'm glad you guys have such a welcoming format here. I've been to other city council meetings, and it's been a little bit more hostile, especially around topics such as, you know, the rights of renters. I would like to just speak in favor of going forward with the March 7th date. In accordance to the first recommendation by the city attorney,
Manager.
right? Was that?
I'm the city manager.
Oh, but the recommendation was from the
City attorney, yes.
from the city attorney. From my experiences, just it's very easy to forget things, and given how soon this is the canvassing and the petition has happened, waiting a year, I think a lot of people would forget about what's going on. A lot of no-cause evictions would happen. It seems like it would be very easy to get lost in the noise and just get prolonged or just not pass. I think holding it sooner would improve the democratic process just in our local community. We want to encourage democratic engagement within our community for people to have a say about, you know, their living standards, their rights and their protections. And it seems, even though it appears that there's some mistakes that quite frankly go over my head, understanding the legal nature of everything, it seems like the best way to go forward would be to just do the March 7th date. I'll ditto that special elections are bad. not bad, like, we shouldn't be doing them. They're just complicated and you don't get the turnout that you would like to see. And it sounds like the other option of delaying it to 2024 not only has the complications of people forgetting and a lot of evictions potentially happening in the time between now and then, but also I believe it was mentioned that's also the 2024 presidential primary, which was echoed that there was concerns for how the voting might be more complicated, given that all residents can vote on this issue, but you have to be citizens to vote in the presidential primary. Could lead to staffing issues. It just gets complicated and messy. It seems like the best path forward is the March 7th date. But those are my comments. Thank you very much for letting me come up and speak, and I'll cede my time, or cede the chair.
Thank you. Would anyone else in the room like to come up?
Hello, I'm Nick Brownell. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a resident of Winooski. I'm gonna say pretty much what everyone else has said. I think moving forward with the March 7th vote is the best plan. It's the best for supporting democracy in our city. It's the best plan for basically, it's obvious that we're kind of in a tough situation, but that does seem to be the best way forward. And I know we've mentioned the urgency, and while this is a city charter change, this will have to go to the state to be approved. I do think that doing this sooner than later will help people from being falsely evicted, from discriminatory renting practices. My current apartment likes to rent in cycles, so they like to have everybody renew their leases at a specific time. It's easier for them to do the actual, bureaucratic work of signing paper, but also if you need to proceed with evictions, I think it also kind of helps them in that regard as well. And I have seen some of my neighbors, I feel, be falsely evicted and not really be given just cause eviction. Many of them were not evicted, they were not served an eviction notice, but rather they were just not given a lease renewal. And I feel that that's horribly unfair to renters. That's one of the reasons why I support just cause eviction, is because we need to make sure that landlords, property owners are following what should be the rules and should be held accountable for injustices against people who are mostly vulnerable. 65% of Winooski residents are voters. It's a pretty large majority in such a small city. And I feel that this is something that should be treated with extreme care. So I'm looking forward to hearing the city council vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Is there anyone else that wants to speak? Come on up.
Hi, my name is Nora Aarons. I use she, her pronouns. I live and rent in Burlington and have for several years now. And as someone who has personally lived through the trauma of a no-cause eviction, I strongly encourage moving forward with the March 7th, 2023 date. And I do mean trauma. When I use that word, I do not use it lightly. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Okay. I see some hands in Zoom. Paul, would you like to start moving people in?
Start with Andy Blanchett. Andy, whenever you're ready.
Hello, City Council, Mayor, and City Manager. My name is Andy Blanchett, and I appreciate the time that you all have given to public comment for such an important issue. Whether just cause eviction will continue to be on the March ballot for the petition as a Winooski City charter change, or if the City Council will vote to delay that. I'm encouraged to know that City Council is leaning towards moving forward as planned. To be clear, I am urging City Council to maintain the original March vote as intended, and here is why. I'm a Winooski resident and renter, and I have been for a number of years. In 2020, I was no-cause evicted from my apartment due to the new owner deciding they would prefer their friends to become their downstairs tenants. This displaced myself, a social worker, along with a local therapist and a local nurse. My My roommates were unable to stay in Winooski due to the last-minute no-cause eviction paired with the ongoing rental crisis. I have been working with fellow residents to collect signatures over the winter to get just cause eviction on the ballot. My partner and I spent hours in the cold knocking on doors and found that both homeowners and renters signed the petition, and all residents and registered voters. This tells me that voters don't want Winooski to continue to be gentrified through no-cause evictions. We clearly enjoy the community we are currently surrounded by. By delaying this vote, you will be effectively allowing more no-cause evictions to take place before voters can even vote on the issue and get the ball rolling in the State House. We not only provided the city with more than enough signatures on the petition, we exceeded the minimum required, and we submitted them on December 13th, well before the deadline, and we would hope that it would still be on the March ballot for that reason. Since myself and fellow residents were able to do our due diligence to ensure voters who signed the petition could expect to see the charter change on the ballot in March, it is only right that the city follow through on their end. To be extremely clear, the city has indicated that equity and housing are top priorities. This is an opportunity to own where the city has gone wrong and honor the work put in by residents to bring this essential housing item to the voters. Please vote to put the just cause eviction charter change item on the March ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Paul, do we have anyone else signed up or anything?
We do. Next up is Amanda Calder. Amanda, whenever you're ready.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Hi. I'm a Winooski renter. I've been living here for about 4 years. And I wanted to also speak in support of having the vote on March 7th as originally planned. I'm one of the people who signed the petition and also asked friends and neighbors to sign. And I just wanted to highlight what people have said. Like, there are no cause evictions happening, all the time. My roommates and I, in our last apartment, left after landlord let us know that they were going to convert our apartment to an Airbnb. So we didn't actually get evicted, but that was what they were going to do. That's a separate issue, sort of, in terms of converting affordable housing to Airbnbs, which is happening. But my downstairs neighbor was just no cause evicted just December 31st with her 4 kids, which was really disruptive for them. I know that a lot of renters, including my neighbor, are scared to speak out about things like our other neighbor getting evicted because they don't want to also have the same thing happen to them. And I think there's such a huge power imbalance between tenants and landlords that having just cause evictions is really important, and there's plenty of accountability there, if someone is violating their lease. So I think it's really important to move forward with this, especially in the housing crisis that we have, and also with the number of renters we have and the vulnerability that a lot of renters have, and how hard it is to find another apartment. So I know it would make a huge difference for the security that myself and my roommates would feel and my neighbors to have this and to have it moving forward. Also, other towns are voting on it as well on town meeting day, so I feel like it helps put us, in sync with other municipalities in Vermont who are looking at making this change as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah.
Do we have anyone else via Zoom?
We have Kyle Smupper who's signed up. Kyle, whenever you're ready.
Yes, I am a Winooski renter, and I just wanted to echo all of the previous comments to urge the vote to happen as soon as possible. I don't really have much to add from what has already been said.
Thank you. Anyone else?
That looks like it. Megan, are you in the audience? Are you Megan Downey? We have another.
Yeah, she spoke from here.
Okay, we are all set. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any last questions? Or does someone want to make a motion to proceed with the schedule we have already?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Jim, second by Aurora. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, we are on to item B. This is on for discussion only. Introduction of proposed changes to sidewalk use. If anyone doesn't want to stay for the remaining items, feel free to just exit. We'll give it a minute then, yeah. Just
I guess sidewalk use isn't as exciting as I thought it was.
Okay, take it away, Eric.
Okay, thank you very much. I am here tonight to provide you with an overview of some proposed changes to Chapter 5 of the city's municipal code related to sidewalk use. As a bit of background, this is something that staff has been discussing for the past several years. Changes in staffing has kind of slowed this process a bit, but we have been diligently working to get this item before you in hopes of having something in place, any changes in place by this year's upcoming sidewalk season. As a little bit of background, historically, the city has accommodated businesses and allowed them to use part of the city sidewalks in various locations, generally in front of the business where, the sidewalk in front of where the business is located. Typically, this has been restaurant seating for the warmer months. This has started out initially as small two-top cafe-style tables and has slowly transitioned into larger picnic tables and other seating arrangements. The pandemic actually created a need for additional outdoor space, and so the city started to relax some of the regulations and accommodate more requests for use of that space. Since then, we have been finding that some of the sidewalk use has started to take up more time than staff had originally anticipated. And it's become a bit more of a process than was originally laid out. So currently, there's a basic application process that is provided. An applicant will fill out the form with some general information about their business, how they intend to utilize the sidewalk, and that's generally it. There's no diagrams, there's no other information about where the space is, what other structures may be located in the space that they're requesting. And so what we wanted to do was create a new process that provides more consistency for the applicants and will hopefully streamline the process a bit more. Ultimately, though, one of the big reasons why we're bringing this up, and one of the things that we've looked at as we've been evaluating the existing regulations, is that the sidewalk space is ultimately city property. So by allowing this use, the city's assuming all the liability. And we want to make sure that these areas that were designed for, that were not designed for use of seating and the outdoor use are being treated in a manner by how they're intentionally designed or how they were initially designed, but also still being mindful to the needs of the business community and trying to support them as much as possible. So what we're proposing are changes that will hopefully accommodate those uses. Also, one other item with the application process, as you may recall, we've had some challenges in the past where two businesses have requested the same space and they've had to come back to you to have that situation rectified. So we're hoping to alleviate some of those issues and having the staff time to take care of those. So this process officially started with outreach to the business community back at the beginning of December. You were all provided some information in advance of it going out to the business community. We provided them with a memo outlining several options, 5 different options that were considered by the city, or at least evaluated, but then ultimately not advanced for one reason or another, and those are all outlined in that memo. We also provided a link for the businesses, either the owners, the employees, patrons, whoever, could provide feedback directly to us on the proposed changes that were being made. At the time of preparing the agenda, we had 13 responses to those to that form on the city's website. That information was included in your agenda packet as well. Since then, we officially shut the form down on Friday, so businesses had up through Friday to respond. We received about 7 more responses. They were all from employees, generally consistent with some of the other responses that we've received. So nothing too grand or new in that regard. In addition to that form, I had received several phone calls and emails from businesses directly, and also I had one business owner stop in directly to talk with me about this information. So what I was hoping to do tonight is just provide a general overview of some of the higher level changes, with the expectation that we would get into a more detailed conversation at a future meeting. In your agenda packet with the cover sheet, I identified February 6th as a potential date for that. I'd actually like to revise that to your next meeting on January 23rd. That will allow us enough time to potentially warn a public hearing for your meeting on February 21st, with the idea that this council would potentially see this process the whole way through before town meeting day, when potentially new councilors would be seated, and then we might have to go through the process again. So if possible, if you're comfortable, that's the timeline that we'd like to proceed with going forward. Completely your decision in that regard. So any questions at that point before I start to highlight some of the changes that are being proposed?
And this might be too in the weeds, but I have a question that I posed back in November when you sent us the original email. One of the concerns, it seemed, was safety concerns, and I had asked what safety concerns we had seen that would warrant the kind of changes that you're proposing due to safety. Didn't hear back from anybody. Reached out to the businesses, and they had not witnessed any safety issues that worried them, or people tripping or being hit by cars that they had reported to the businesses. So if I could get clarification on that question I asked in November today, that would be great.
Sure. So I'm not sure if I can point to any specific examples that have happened, but I think that's the point, is that we've recognized that the areas that are being used for, in particular, outdoor seating, were not designed for that particular use. They're designed right now to accommodate vehicles for the most part. Where we're talking about the outdoor space is directly adjacent to parking. And the angled spaces in and around the downtown core, and I guess just to back up a step, primarily we're talking about in and around the downtown core area, because that's where we have sidewalks wide enough to accommodate use. Other sidewalks in the city don't really have the space right now, so that's primarily where this occurs. So the spaces that are the angled parking on the west side of the Rotary in particular, and along the Winooski block, are really intended for vehicles, for the bumper overhang. We have, like I said, we haven't seen any, at least I'm not aware of any reported incidents of vehicles interacting with pedestrians in that regard, but I think that's the point here. We want to make sure that we're getting in front of it so that doesn't happen. Right now, again, the city is assuming full liability if something were to happen in that area. So because it is the city's space, we want to make sure that we're protecting the city in that regard.
Okay, thank you. So and we've had outdoor seating for how long now? I mean, a while.
That's a good question. Yeah, it's been 10, 15 years at least, I would say.
So 15 years of not seeing anything. So just want to note that. But,
or at least nothing that's been reported,
yeah.
I would say.
And we've spoken with the city lawyer, and there's no way of transferring that liability to the business. They lease that space from us, or?
I mean, I think ultimately it remains city property, so we can be named as an insured, but at the end of the day, I think any legal action would involve the city, because it's still the city's property.
Okay. I know that some of the businesses are more than happy to discuss that liability and sharing that, so I think that answers that question from November, so thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, and that's my apologies for not getting back to you timely.
Thank you.
And I will say that it is the job of staff to look for the worst possible scenario and help the city plan and prepare for those. So I understand the frustration that people might feel that if there hasn't been an issue, why? But one issue could be very, very expensive for the city.
I had a question before getting into the weeds. There was only one map included. I would have expected the entire downtown area as well as planning for Main Street, so.
Yeah, so those are both good questions, or good points. I think the map that was included was really more to show an example of what this would look like, and I think it's important to note that not every area of the sidewalk, not every location of where sidewalk use is happening is the same. So these changes may not affect businesses at all. It may actually, in some cases, give businesses more space. It may also make the outdoor seating more accessible for people with mobility impairments. Some of the businesses, some of the buildings are not currently ADA accessible because the doorways are either too narrow or there's thresholds that they can't cross. So by incorporating in some of the changes that are outlined, the businesses may actually get more space and make their space more accessible. So because because each area is different, it's hard to really lay out what that's going to look like. So the map that we included was really intended to show a sample of one particular block.
And I recall in previous meetings, we wanted this to be as predictable as possible. So it seems like having maps for all of the potentially leased outdoor spaces would be beneficial in the future for predictability. Moving on from that, one thing that stood out to me, I mean, there's a lot in here, but one thing that stood out to me as an overarching question, I noticed that a newer requirement or new language, I should say, to have $2 million liability coverage. What decided $2 million as opposed to $1 million?
So, quite frankly, that was a number that was put in. What my intent is to get feedback from you all and then get legal perspective from our attorney, which may change some of those numbers, but that was really just a starting point at this point.
Okay. I've seen more traditionally for contractors, for grants, that 1 million seems to be more common of a minimum liability coverage. So that's why it stood out to me as like, is there something there
Sure.
that I don't know about?
Any other?
You want to walk us through and we'll
Yep, happy to do
along the
that.
way?
So I'm just going to highlight some of the bigger changes for you all, and please feel free to ask questions or ask about other items that I'm not highlighting. So the first item I would note is on page 3, which is a new definition for storefront, basically trying to clarify what area we are allowing to be utilized for sidewalk use. This carries over onto page 4, and actually another change that I'll note at the bottom of page 4, simply because I think it's an important clarification. There's some language being stricken in section 5.03 under general provisions. Part of this is being done because there's been some changes to the licensing through the state's Office of Liquor and Lottery, I think they're called now, where they're doing it on an anniversary date rather than on an annual basis. So some of the timelines that are outlined in that section wouldn't make sense anymore for some of the other aspects that this specific chapter of the municipal code is affecting or impacting. So it made sense to remove that language as well. So a new definition for what a storefront actually is. Then the next big change is going to come on page 9, where we start getting into the actual area of sidewalk use, the timing for when sidewalk use is permitted. We currently don't have any written documentation on what the sidewalk season, as I call it, technically is.
If you don't mind,
Sure.
do you want to ask questions along the way, or?
Yeah, that's fine.
So for the definition, page 4, just below number 3, it says these regulations are not applicable to temporary or seasonal. Can
Right.
you just give some more detail?
Yeah, so really the idea being that if we wanted it to be a brick and mortar storefront. That was the idea there, so that if somebody's putting up a temporary tent or something, that doesn't then give them new space that they can acquire unless it falls under one of the other categories that's been outlined.
Okay.
further back under, I believe, under the sidewalk use section in 5.09.
And that's helpful, because it seemed, because of the pandemic, operating hours seem to be more variable than they did pre-pandemic.
Sure.
So I didn't want inadvertently to create some restrictions if that wasn't the intent.
Yeah, it's, and I think, so what this would allow is for that space potentially to be used under this permitting process, depending on how it is located and what the surrounding uses are.
I see.
So it may still be eligible. I can't think of a good example of that, but it could still be eligible space to be utilized.
For example, El Cortijo was closed for a chunk of the pandemic. That could have been space under these parameters that are being proposed that could have been used by Scout.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Yep, and I believe that type of example, Counselor, is outlined under section, it's either under 509 or a future section, but yes.
Okay.
So we tried to build in as much of those accommodations as possible for businesses that are either operating under different hours, that could potentially share additional space. So for example, Sneakers is mostly a morning and daytime business, where Monkey House is more of an evening and afternoon business. So potentially, if they were able to work it out, they could share all the space in front of both of those buildings. Or if there's a business that does not want to use outdoor space, they could an adjacent business could potentially take over the space in front of their business, the sidewalk space, with an agreement from that business.
Okay, thank you.
So again, we're building in provisions to potentially accommodate more space than some of the businesses currently have, if under certain circumstances. So section 509 provides more of the specific details on the actual permit use itself, who can apply for it, the time of year that's usable, and then this gets into some of the other allowances like we just talked about for sharing of space.
Can I ask you about the timing?
Sure.
Is there a reason why we wanted to set from April 1st to November 30th instead of just tying it to snow poles?
So the April 1st to November 30th coincides with I believe it coincides with the parking ban for the city. So that's generally the operational time when we're trying to make sure that we've got more space cleared for maintenance and for those kind of off-season events that we might need to go out and clear snow, for example. So generally after April 1st, similar with the overnight parking ban, we're generally confident that if we do have a weather event, it's going to be either small enough or warm enough that it can be taken care of. But so before that, it's a little uncertain, a little less certain.
Okay, thank you.
We also talk about in this section about potential of, I believe it's in this section, or maybe it's in 510, about adding in structures. So you may have noticed that Misery Loves Company, they had a big structure built. We are allowing for an accommodation of that, provided it, again, meets the offset from the curb line, and in certain circumstances, if it needs permitting because either the height or the design of it for any type of building code, that is built in as well, but we're not prohibiting that type of design to be allowed in here. And also in some cases, a business may want to build in some sort of a structure because some of the businesses along the Winooski block for sure, and along the west side of the circle, there is that step down to where they generally are using the seating. By accommodating that 2-foot space, they may need to put in some kind of a structure. I actually had a conversation with one of the business owners that basically said, I'll just shave a little bit off the legs of the table and slide them in, and I'll be fine. I won't have to build anything in there. I'll have the same number of tables I had as I did last year. This won't affect me at all. So again, it's going to impact people differently. A business like Archives on the other side of the circle, this probably won't do anything to them because they've got plenty of space there for sidewalk. There's no step downs. There's no other structures in the way. The other part that comes into play with this section is to identify the fact that we will need to build in some space for existing public, as I'm calling it, public furniture. So bike racks, parking kiosks, things of that nature. So they're still usable. We had some instances this past year where I believe at the Grazers location on the southern end there, their tables were right up against the bike racks that were on that corner, so those bike racks were virtually useless and couldn't be utilized because there was tables right in the way. So we had to work with the business to make sure that they were creating additional space. We've also heard from several residents about the clear space in front of Mandarin with that light pole. So we want to make sure again that we're taking into account those type of features and structures that are there and are city assets and being utilized for benefit of the community in some instances, and making sure there's appropriate space around those items so that they can be utilized for their intended purpose. And again, this will all come into some of the new application that will include diagrams and other information that will outline all of this information.
It's a bit, we can postpone this question. But I can't help but think, cart before the horse. So with Main Street, do we have design plans to know well enough how this will affect that? Or is this something that will change? We see like the potential for amending this once we have design plans.
That's a good question. I think, and I may let John Rauscher jump in here as well since he's on, but I believe this should accommodate any changes to Main Street as well. I know the design of Main Street is going to be a bit different, so it's going to be a bit wider sidewalk, a bit wider tree belt, so we may need to look specifically at where we would allow for use of sidewalk space. But again, that we may need to see more of what's happening there. So John, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, nothing really. I mean, so for the Main Street project, I think we have roughly 7 or 8 foot sidewalks and I believe a 7-foot streetscape belt. There's no angled parking. It's all parallel parking, so it's not going to impact similar to around the rotary and those areas. Want to see cafe space because one of the main intentions of the Main Street project is to provide a wider pedestrian route. So typically you want to see like a 7 or 8 foot pedestrian pathway in more congested downtown areas and provide better pedestrian access. And as soon as you start putting cafe tables and things like that in the pedestrian route, you're jacking things back down to the 5-foot path that we have out there now. So we'll have to come up with a policy to review where cafe space would be appropriate on Main Street.
Okay.
Also, to that point, one of the changes that was recently made to the Gateway zoning district allows for a portion of the building, depending on how big it is, to be set back further from the property line, the required building line. And part of that, the purpose for that setback was to accommodate any type of outdoor space for a ground floor business. Okay. So we built some of that accommodation into the zoning component, presuming that a developer would take advantage of it.
Okay.
The other big change that I wanted to highlight for you all, and I think the last one, is on page 12. For the approval process, what we're outlining here is an initial approval would happen by council, but then you all could delegate future approvals of that sidewalk use to staff, so under certain circumstances. So if there's been no violations to either Department of Liquor and Lottery, to any of their regulations or to any city regulations within 2 years, if the size of the space has not changed from the previous year, and if the ownership of the business has not changed, you all could delegate that approval to staff so that it'll hopefully help streamline the process and have a quicker turnaround time for the businesses. So those, I think, are the big changes that I wanted to highlight. But again, just more of a higher level overview tonight with the intent of coming back to you at a future meeting to get into more detail, hopefully address any concerns you may have, and then hopefully set a public hearing.
So this last section about delegation, so it says the business has not been issued a violation or been cited, but I believe we've had complaints without citations this past year. Is that correct?
I don't know. I wouldn't have received at least any type of.
So like Mandarin, were they cited? Probably not, because we didn't have parameters. We didn't have these parameters.
For encroachment of the,
right.
or limiting the sidewalk space. I don't believe that we ever formally cited them. I'm not sure that we had a mechanism to do that, but I believe we did talk to the business on those occasions.
So I just wonder, a question for council, would we want to have something come back that has had a complaint but not a citation?
No. That's my offhand reaction.
Because there are a lot of, I mean, there are a lot of, I can think of a number of occasions where something may not raise to the occasion of a citation, especially knowing how much we try to work with our businesses, but it could potentially warrant another look.
I mean, I feel like if there's a complaint and then you go back and the business hasn't rectified it, then a citation would.
I'm just thinking procedurally,
Yeah.
like,
I think a citation is a good baseline level for bringing something back to council. I don't think individual complaints are. Somebody can be complaining about a business who's actually not violating any issues. I don't think that's worth pulling it out of administrative approval. And if they really have a problem, you know, they can speak at public comment, they can reach out to us, we could ask to pull something out of administrative approval. But I wouldn't want to have a standard where any complaint means we're still doing all of these approvals.
I hear that. Is this something that would be on a consent agenda?
Not if it's going through administration. Right, like the point of this is we talked about this before. We keep having to do these approvals when there's nothing, I don't know what the word I want. Materially, nothing has changed. But we make people come in here and see us so that we can approve their sidewalk permit.
Right, and I think.
And we wanted to move that to staff.
You're right,
so
and I'm in agreement with that. I'm thinking about the instances where some of the things might warrant another look that don't rise to a citation.
I hear you. I'm saying I think if it's not a citation, it doesn't warrant another look.
Yeah.
And I wonder if with this significantly more structure and definition in this ordinance, if we will then, it'll be clearer what is the citation and what is a non, like if there's a complaint that isn't addressed by this, then it's a call for, if there's a valid complaint or something we want to address, then we would reopen this ordinance and make additional changes to fix that. If it's, so I feel like there's that, if there's something broken that the complaint is highlighting, then we would fix it, and I would expect staff to raise that.
Mm-hmm.
Or if there's something that's on the line and they can't call, whether it's administrative or not, then bring it to us. Like, and I think there's some, I think that discretion should be on staff rather than us knee-jerk looking at every complaint. That'd be my, what I would expect this to, how I expect this to play out if it's put out there.
And I think that's some of the intent of why we're adding in so much new language, is so that we do have parameters to evaluate any issues or concerns or complaints that come forward to us. We now have, or we potentially would have a regulatory mechanism to point to say you are in violation of X, Y. So it's, right now we don't have that, so it's harder to enforce the sidewalk use.
Yeah, and I'm not thinking that it's going to be often, but for the occasion where something is an issue and then council doesn't have an opportunity to weigh in. So essentially having a procedural hole of some variety. So it's the rare occasion that I'm thinking about, not general.
And I think also in previously, these were coming before you all because you were also reviewing the outdoor consumption permitting at the same time. And now that those are being separated because of the anniversary date, you would be seeing, or an application for sidewalk use may come in randomly rather than with an application for outside consumption. So those two are potentially being separated. So hopefully the administrative process would allow staff to address those when they come in outside of that normal time frame.
I have a question about the dimensions in 510. The 5 foot minimum, that's ADA, right? We already enforced that?
So yes, I believe ADA may only be 3 feet, but I think because it's and John, I'll look to you on that as well. But I think because of the location of where a lot of these sidewalks are, they're in the busier areas, we want to provide additional space for pedestrians.
Yeah, that's right. 3 feet is the minimum for ADA requirement, but typically it's a 5 foot space that we provide. And
also when we build sidewalks, just in general, they're 5 foot wide sidewalks. So that's typical dimension of a sidewalk.
And then the 2-foot buffer for parking, where do you get that number from?
So that I believe is from, John, I'll look to you again. I believe that is from the ITE, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, their manual for the design of these actual spaces, for the angle of the space. Being 45-degree angle spaces, I believe it calls for a 2-foot overhang.
Yeah, close. It's Urban Land Institute dimensions of parking handbook. There's no hard and fast rule for this dimension, but 2 feet is a reasonable design guide that we found. I've seen higher ones too, but that seems a little overkill. So we're going by the ULI standards for that, for the 45-degree parking.
And that incorporates from the face of the curb. So the actual curb width itself is included in that 2-foot dimension.
Seeing all the concern about lost space, I wonder if there's any flexibility on that number. I don't see cars overhanging 2 feet typically down there, so.
Or differentiation between parallel and angled parking. Because I think the 2 feet swing on the door opening makes sense. To me, I can see that requirement, but I don't see necessarily a 2-foot overhang of a vehicle bumper on an angled parking.
Many of these places have the picnic tables, right? And it sounds like those are gonna be not work in this scenario, and we maybe don't want picnic tables. But I feel like the picnic tables has served as that safety buffer. Like, a car could hit the edge of the table, but not the person. It's probably not best practice for liability, but.
Yeah, and also, I'm sure you all read the business responses, but like, the picnic table enables the business to serve the customers that go to a business. Very infrequently do you go out to dinner with just a couple people, like one other person.
Yeah.
It's date night maybe, but not generally. So I think the picnic tables are kind of key to what our downtown needs to provide for residents and visitors.
And I don't think there's anything in these proposed changes that would prohibit the use of picnic tables. It may require that a business add in a bit more infrastructure to accommodate the table, in some cases where that step down occurs. So, but there's nothing about what we've written, or at least there's no intention of what we've written that would require a business to not use a picnic table. It may just require them to do a little bit more. So in the example of the one business owner that reached out to me about just cutting down the legs of the table to accommodate that step, that's a perfectly acceptable solution to do that. The other thing I wanted to mention about that 2-foot clear space for the angled parking, what it does is it accommodates the bumper overhang, but it would also accommodate a place for the passengers of that vehicle to walk. Yeah. So that they're not having to walk out into the travel lane to get around some of the barriers that are put up around these outdoor seating areas. So if they do need to get from place to place, that would provide some additional space for them to walk.
There was a question about, for those angled parking, how the space between them before you have the additional barrier, the island, like what are the requirements, spacing requirements for that? Is that meeting minimum? Is that over minimum? Like what, the space for cars that need to back up? What more additional information do you have on that?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question.
Okay. So when you're pulling in front of businesses, Misery Loves Company, Monkey House, whatever, there's a barrier on the traffic side.
Oh, okay. Yes.
So,
that's basically the median and the curb.
Right. I saw a question come in the packet about the space between where the car once parked and the space open between that travel lane between the car parked and then that median.
Got it.
What those requirements need to be and what they are now.
So I believe right now it's a 12-foot clear space according to the diagram that John put together. And just so that I understand, you're referring to basically the travel way between...
It's like a corridor.
Right, between the actual travel lane of Main Street and the little drive aisle
Correct.
behind the parking spaces on
Correct.
the other side of that median. Yeah, so according to the diagram John put together, it's just over 12 feet right now. I think probably the bigger issue with that drive aisle is going to be emergency services. And if for some reason we needed to get a fire truck in there, having enough space that truck could park safely. And I'll look to Chief Audie if he wants to.
And same question, what are the minimums?
That's a good question. John, I'm not sure if you know.
Yeah, offhand, I don't know. I mean, please remember, this was all pretty intentionally designed by transportation engineers. Not to say we can't question some of these dimensions, but, you know, this was designed. So John Audie, I think, would be a good one to reference too, because I believe for the fire truck access, we always look at 12 feet minimum access to get a fire truck in there as well. There is potential, I guess, to maybe try to shrink that down, but you're still going to have that issue with the curb overhang. So unless you do something to shallow up that parking depth, you're really not changing the issue with cars overhanging the curb. That's kind of the issue we're having with these cafe seating spots.
Yeah, looking for a response, because I didn't see one in the packet to that effect, so just looking to clear that up.
So looking for the minimum travel width for basically that drive aisle.
And maybe, I think another piece we would need to have is the minimum depth of the parking stall itself. Because right now I think these are quite long parking stalls. And the question is, does the entire parking stall need to move as the parking stall becomes shorter? I don't know if that was implied in your question as well.
Essentially.
Yeah, I believe the dimensions of the parking stalls as they're designed, 9 foot by 18 foot, for an angled parking of this is basically the standard size.
Do we have any public comment signed up for this topic, Paul?
We do not.
Is there anyone in the Zoom audience that wishes to speak? Let's bring Meredith over.
I'll also just mention while Meredith is coming over, Councilor Renner mentioned that Downtown Board is meeting tomorrow night. I'm intending to go to their meeting and talk to them about this as well. So do some additional outreach directly to the board.
All right, Meredith, I think you're on.
Hi, y'all. I just wanted to say one thing, which is that we have been aware of these changes and have had great conversations with staff. And so I think all the questions are so thoughtful and I really appreciate them. And I just wanted to shout out to city staff because they've been doing a tremendous amount of work on this and we've had a lot of questions and feelings. And so we know that there's a lot involved in this, but I do feel like this process and hopefully at the next meeting where more intense discussion, I don't know if intense is the right word, discussions and action potentially is taken on this. I'm sure that we'll have some business owners and other interested parties, participating. But I just wanted to say thank you to city staff and for you guys for giving, your thoughts and for being so thoughtful about this because there is a really difficult thing at play here, which is the safety and the liability on the city side. And I understand you have to be risk averse, but also supporting the businesses. And it took me a long time to kind of get my head around what this actually means and to Brandon's point, like it's different on every street, so that's complicated. But ultimately, I do feel that there is actually more positive potentially, and it's a little bit less scary than I originally thought. So I just want to say thank you to everyone, and that we will definitely be, doing some more formalized statements and bringing some friends to the next meeting. But that there's been a ton of work done before this point. So I just wanted to make that point and to say thank you to Eric and John and Elaine.
Thank you, Meredith.
Same appreciation goes for Meredith, by the way.
Yeah, I would be interested in the future hearing from business owners. Like, these survey responses are very concerned, but I don't understand how it translates to, like, from what you're showing us. There's this like undertone of this means we can't have any outdoor seating or something. So hearing more about those concerns will be useful.
One other item I want to highlight is related to this. We are in the early processes of working on a separate arrangement with certain businesses that have city property, but they're not really sidewalk. So if you think about the space in front of McKee's, where it's city property, but it's not really the travel path of a sidewalk. Similarly, Waterworks, their outdoor space. We're working, again, very initial stages of this, but working on specific lease agreements with those businesses. So they would fall kind of outside of this sidewalk use because of the nature of their outdoor space that they have. So in this instance, what we're talking about is really where there's a true pedestrian travel component to the sidewalk use that will be impacted. That's what this piece of the code is intended to address.
Okay.
So we want to be mindful that not all businesses are the same in those regards as well, and so we want to try to create a different arrangement with those entities.
Are there additional questions? Is there any other feedback you're looking for?
Not at this time. I think I believe I wrote down all the questions that you all were looking for additional information on, and we'll hopefully bring that back at the next meeting. I think the big thing will be just that, trying to get this scheduled for your next meeting on January 23rd rather than on February 6th, as it was indicated in the agenda packet.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
All right, before we get into our next significant item, I'm going to call a 5-minute recess. It's 7:33, so 7:38, reconvene.
The FY24 recommended budget from the city manager, that's me. Over the last month, you have received presentations from the city's leadership team. Per state statute, the budget has to be warned 30 to 40 days prior to annual meeting, which you've finalized, thank you. So you would need to have the vote warned between January 26th and February 5th. Your last scheduled meeting before that is January 23rd, next week, so that's why we've scheduled your vote on the budget and warning for that meeting. Staff have updated the budget proposal in response to recent conversations about equity and trying to find other savings. These, as well as items that council are actively debating, are highlighted in green in the budget scenario tool for your consideration. There was one item that I neglected to highlight, the St. Michael's adjustment, which I'll review in a minute. Items included in the tool are A, possible cuts identified by staff from the overall general fund budget that would not significantly impact current operations. B, stretch budget items to make progress on strategies and priority initiatives. Or C, items requested by council for review. So departing from my cover sheet now, a recommended change that you haven't heard me discuss yet in a public meeting that could reduce the FY24 budget, as alluded to earlier, postponing the change to the St. Michael's arrangement to FY25, but budgeting for in-kind fire vehicle diesel fuel for FY24, and a fuel management system so we can accountably track their use. My apologies for missing that highlight in the Friday packet. Another change I mentioned last week that I'm recommending based on feedback from a community stakeholder is the mediated community voice program. And staff also recommend, as I mentioned last week, increasing the budgeted revenue to local options tax based on updated numbers from this fiscal year by $47,500 net next month. You'll notice that the use of ARPA funding in the tool is down to $363,000. If you want to use the original recommended amount of $409,000, which I am at least still comfortable with, that gives you $47,000 to bring back into the budget. I'll say that since we changed the housing initiative director posting to 30 hours from 40 hours, we haven't had a single applicant. I can't say for a fact that that's a direct correlation, but you can have your own suspicions about that. If you wanted to bring that back to 40 hours, that would leave $18,588 to spend elsewhere. So we're looking for you to have a discussion and then provide direction to staff on any changes you'd like to see before the final vote next week as perhaps your final recommendation, or if you wanted clarification before then, before even knowing what your final would be.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. I want to bring some order to this discussion. So start with any outstanding questions that we have. We can take public comment. We can then make statements about what we want to see or propose changes, which I would let everybody do before we start digging into those and debating. So to keep things orderly, I do want to make sure that we're not submitting positions right away, that we first start with just doing clarifying questions. And before kicking that off, I do want to recognize this is the most challenging budget I've seen in the 5 years I've been involved in this process. It's our job as leaders in the community to make tough decisions about what we need and what we can resource. I think staff has done a lot of that for us already. You know, you guys really dug in and made some difficult decisions, trying to balance needs, resources, equitable delivery of service. I think that you presented a budget that prioritizes that direct service delivery, connection building in the community, and safety, which are things that residents feel in their day-to-day. It is a higher than normal increase you presented, but we have to find some way to meet inflation and limit adverse impacts to residents, both in the services they receive and in the cost to them. So there are a lot of decisions here, it's difficult, it's a difficult balance. And I just want to name that. So let's start first focused on any final questions we have, like outstanding questions or points of clarification.
Can I ask more questions about this new suggested mediated community voice program?
Do you want to give a high-level overview?
Yeah, so I don't remember what I said last week. The model that was presented to us as one that has been used by this person in their consultancies for other organizations. I think that the term was like a year, where members of the affected community, in this case it would be Winooski residents or business owners or employees or whatever, I'd call them stakeholders broadly. Members who are marginalized in particular would be invited into a process where they could meet with one-on-one with staff people and explain to them, what their experience is living here, working here, what have you. And then it would be up to us as staff to manage that input and see, well, what could we change in response to that? So in a way, I see it as spreading out what would have been all gathered by the equity director, then it's their job to make it all happen. My sense is that it makes this more of all of our jobs. There isn't necessarily that direct accountability of like, okay, you say this, we're gonna do that. But an equity director wouldn't be able to guarantee that either. The mediated portion of that is, I'm sure there's members of the community who don't feel comfortable or even safe potentially talking directly to any of us, or if they have a issue with how I'm managing things, they might not feel comfortable talking to me directly. And so the mediator's role would be to hear that as somebody who's trusted by the community and who understands how city operations work, to hear that feedback and translate it to us. So again, it feels to me like a more accessible way to get towards that dialogue. I think I called it like porosity between the community and City Hall that I think we need in order to get to more understanding of what it's like from many people's perspectives, not just those who already have access to us. I think I had mentioned a higher figure last time, and I did some back of the napkin math on, so say we were compensating the community at $50 per meeting. a community member, and then potentially the same amount for the mediator. And I'm not saying that has to be the number, but in when communities around Vermont are directly compensating marginalized community members for their time sharing their lived experience, that's the number that I've always seen. Like, I haven't even seen a different number. I don't know where it came from, but it seems to be common. So if we use that and I divided it into the $47,500 of potential revenue, I got to a number of hours that city staff cannot possibly absorb. Like, maybe people could come and talk to us and we would have no time to deal with any of it or do our regular jobs. So that's still an optimistic number, what we built in. But it seemed like I think a budget is like, we have 2 meetings a week. That's still a lot, I have to tell you. That's a lot to be trying to act on, but at least it gives us some room for, say, maybe something that they give us input on would cost some money, and then we'd have some money that we could spend on that, or translation services or interpretation services.
Thank you.
Given that we're looking at a potential validation vote and we don't know when that needs to happen, curious about the language access support that we'll need for ballot translation interpretation, and if that should be built into this.
You mean into this line item?
Into this budget.
Into this budget. Angela, there is or is not something already in there?
So this budget would not take effect until July 1, 2023. So unless your vote for the verification is going to happen after that date, it should not be included in this budget.
Right, I said something about maybe having that in the fall, so it potentially would be.
There is budget in here for currently 1 election. The verification vote, I think we are still running numbers to determine what potential cost for that would be, and it could be much smaller than a ballot encoded that has to run through the machine. It could be a hand count ballot, but with the existing elections, that line item within the general fund of, I believe it's $3,800 per election. That is the minimum to translate into, I believe, 5 languages, have encoded ballots, and have staff to run.
Jenny has a comment if you want to take it.
Yeah, please.
So thank you. For the validation costs, I contacted Language Link, who previously has been our contact for the March of 22 annual meeting. And to do 9 languages, it was about $775 of the overall cost, which I came up with about $2,800. But $775 would cover the language access.
Thank you. You have any questions, Jim?
Sure. We haven't talked, I don't believe, so forgive me if we have, about the interpretation at the polls being a cut or a not fund in the tool. That's not included in the budget currently. So previous town meeting day, we did have interpretation at the polls, but we wouldn't have it for future, for March 24's town meeting in this budget. Is that the intention of that line in that budget tool?
There is no current budget for interpretation at the polls. That was being pulled from other line items in order to cover that due to the miscommunication of what was available.
Got it. So that would still need to happen in future years if we don't include that line. We'd have to pull from other funds to make that happen.
That's correct. If we're providing interpretation at the polls, it would need to be covered by a different line item.
And a follow-up, if that's okay, Jim. We don't have a language access plan, correct?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
So when the language access plan is finalized, right now there is a translation budget, because this 6,000 ad would be a doubling of our translation budget So there's existing translation budget for that language access plan, but no interpretation budget to support
I
it.
think it cover, thought we had some for interpretation somewhere else potentially, professional
Not
services.
another line item, we have used that existing translation money also for interpretation when needed.
The police department records clerk, and this is a bigger question about regional dispatch. Do you have any updates on where that South Burlington plan lies?
I don't, unfortunately.
All right. So our plan is just to assume that we're going to stay with dispatch, regional dispatch, that something's going to happen there, and we will need the assistant.
That's my recommendation, that you assume that something will happen so that you have some money to do it with.
Okay. And then if we don't, we just have extra money in the budget.
It could be reappropriated per our policy, so if it didn't come to fruition, we could come back to council with a budget amendment to repurpose those funds.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Ray, I have some questions about the diagram or whatever. Thank you. And thank you for putting that together.
Yeah.
So there's a note about the recreation assistant. If this position was eliminated, we will not be able to support any full-week summer camps other than Thrive. What does that mean?
Yeah, so so Thrive typically runs, depending on the school calendar, 6 or 7 weeks, and that's driven by access to the school building. So usually the first or second week in August, the school says we need a few weeks to clean up, get ready for the school year. So Thrive is not able to access the school building. So this past 2 summers with ESSER funding, what we've been able to do is add on both the front and back end of the summer some additional full week, full day camps run through the recreation department, which is not something we had done historically. So really what it's allowed us to do is have more continuous care for kids during the summer. Those camps are typically a little smaller, so Thrive was running around 60 kids a week. Those camps were running closer between 20 and 30, just based on where we could be. But still, that's 20 or 30 kids a week in those weeks of the summer that we were able to care for, full day, full week.
Okay. And then you mentioned with the admin role, I think it was the admin role, not being able to manage rentals in the O'Brien Center.
Correct.
But we were doing that before this role, so I wonder what changed.
Poorly, to be clear.
Yeah.
I don't think that's something we want to go back to. I think that with the increase in programming that we've seen, I don't think we could continue to offer programming as we are and do a good job managing that space for folks. I mean, we were quite candidly giving folks a key and saying, we'll see you Monday, good luck in there. And that's not good service.
It's also not necessarily good for the facility.
Yeah, exactly. And we were dealing then with a lot of cleanup and damage and issues, building being left open on the weekend. So we've tried to, I think, learn with some of those successes that the previous tenant in renting spaces was exhibiting around how to kind of run a public space, and trying to mirror some of that. So.
Okay. And then the last one was the ESSER supplies, which I think you told us in the meeting, but I forgot.
So yeah, and Angela may have to help me here. So 2 years ago when ESSER came on, we saw the supply lines grow because we were running more programs. And so we budgeted for additional supplies because we were running more programs. And so looking into this next budget year, we did trim those supply lines back in anticipation of ESSER going away. But we did maintain some growth in those areas. And so when I'm saying supplies, that's general supplies, which by our terminology is sort of office supplies, anything that could be used sort of portably across departments. And then specialty supplies are more typically, like in our case, dodgeballs and basketballs. And while those would probably be fun for my friends at Public Works, not something that they would typically use in their day-to-day. So a bunch of those lines across the detailed budget grew with ESSER, and so we did propose to keep some of those increased but scaled those back. I think it was $6,500 that we opted or proposed to cut back from last year's budget.
Okay. That was it for me.
Okay.
While we have Ray, did anyone else have questions about
Yeah, I also on the O'Brien Center rentals, so it seems like there is, can you give us a sense of the demand right now?
It's high. So Zara has been working pretty much every weekend, 1 or 2 days since we started opening that, and we have done no promotion whatsoever.
Yeah.
So that's all word of mouth, community folks finding out that it's available. So I think that's a floodgate that if we put a little effort into could really open up. But again, I don't think that's something we can sustain without that position that Zara's in now.
And is that also access to kitchen over there?
It is, yeah. We've seen a little bit less kitchen use. Again, we haven't promoted it. So it's been a few folks that had been using it when North End Studios was there. And then a couple of the folks that are doing like the cultural meals that have been coming in. And again, just kind of refinding us without any promotion.
Mm-hmm. And we don't have a timeline for any potential change of use?
With that building?
With the building.
Not at this point, no. I know there was an email right before I left. I think there's some looking at plans happening and some budgeting happening, but nothing definitive at this point.
Okay. Helpful. And then a question for John, I guess, somebody else. Because it changes the infrastructure. I'll let you off the hook, Ray. So toward the bottom of the tool, line striping contract. So does that mean the funding that was previously allocated for line striping is proposed to be removed?
No.
Okay.
No, this was per a tool that John had sent me, an addition to the line striping contract to use more durable materials and potentially expand the scope. So the existing line is $20,000 in the budget. This would expand that for those more durable so that we don't have to do them as frequently.
Yeah, mainly expand scope because they're going to be going through the bike ped master plan work that Eric will be leading. So I fully expect there's going to be some additional line striping work that comes out of that. So that's a placeholder mainly for any additional crosswalk work we need to do beyond the scope that's already approved, that you all approved, and then the bike ped master plan, any priority work there.
Point of clarification. So, John, you said scope, but is it scope and durability of paint, or is it scope?
So the additional funding will be for contract work, and that will be more durable type paint. So it's striping work that we can't do internally. It's just contract work.
So both.
Okay. And
Yep.
what's the expense for needing to do it again sooner?
State that again, the expense for...
So you get what you pay for. So if we're paying for less durable paint, we have to redo the lines sooner. So what's that expense for having to redo the lines sooner?
It's a variable cost due to the price of paint and the availability of paint.
But would we expect that we would be budgeting the same amount next year for the same lines that we did this year? Is that fair?
So the overall program that we're trying to implement is that every year we're going to be budgeting for the main corridors at least. So depending on what happens, ideally we'd be doing Main Street one year, East Allen Street one year, now it's Bay Avenue another year, like a 3-year cycle, and then some of the collector streets. So we have budgeted currently for this coming...
20 is in the base budget for FY24. I'm just looking at what we have spent just for paint from Franklin Paint Company per fiscal year. It runs roughly $6,000 to $8,000 just for the paint, not including any new tips or other pieces that we need for the equipment.
Yeah, and that's just the water-based paint material that we do internally on some of the lower traffic crosswalks.
Does council have any more questions for clarification? Okay. Before opening public comment, I do want to just make sure you have all seen. Additionally, in the agenda, there is a memo on unfunded needs. So these are like capital items that we already know about. For the general fund portion, that is over $3 million plus 12 items that aren't yet estimated, and $15 million in water and wastewater needs coming in the near term. I also want to share, I did with the workbook here, if we were to implement everything in here, so all these stretch items and all these additional known needs, that is, I can't remember what the total is, but it would result in a $1,000 increase, a 37% increase to the tax rate. It was about 2.3 million for all of that too. And I want to say this so that we and residents understand, like, we can't do everything all at once, and this is why there is this balancing of what are the most important things. Yeah. And the decisions we make this year impact our capacity to take on more next year and the years following. Are there any public comments or questions from the public? Okay. Oh, I see a hand.
Can you all hear me? This is Daisy.
Welcome, yes.
Hi, I just wanted to say hi and let you know I'm here and I'm looking through the packet. I just really appreciate the work that everybody did putting this together, and I'm looking through many of the program forms that folks have filled out, and including where they detail the impact of certain decisions that could be made, and just want to say how illuminating it is as to the impact that these programs have. I mean, I know it as a constituent and participant in many of these programs, including the library and the community center, and just want to say thanks to the program directors who were there in the room, how much I appreciate the services and the work that they put into pulling budget together.
Thank you. More staff kudos. Okay, so if we have the information we need, now would be the chance if anyone wants to propose an add or removal or any type of change to what's been presented to us. Do you have anything, Thomas?
I have a lot of things, but none that I believe makes sense for us to fund right now. So I'm just gonna leave those out. But they, yeah.
Jim, is there anything you want to suggest?
Sure, I can always make suggestions. I was just trying to dial in exactly what they were again to make sure I have it right.
Maybe I'll rethink that.
Yeah, we can come back to you too.
Yeah.
We can go back and forth. I just want to make sure everyone has a chance to share before we start debating.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start by saying that the attempt to keep the tax rate to 5% with buy down by ARPA is, and pre-committing or kicking hard decisions down the road is uncomfortable to me. And I want to put that out there in the open, that whatever, even if we just accept the level services budget, that's what we're doing. And I think that's also important to square. I do think it is somewhat in keeping with the charge of the TIF in keeping tax rate increases low in the future. That's what this would do, but it is kind of we are assuming that decision will be kept into the future, and that's not clear. I've been thinking a lot about the significant expansion of community services that this would represent. This is an institutionalization of a bunch of services that we were not providing before and that were expected to be temporary. Once ESSER expired, they would go away. And that the equity director was modeled as a permanent position that would persist beyond grant funds. And as I've reflected on that and the things that I'm going to propose keeping, I'm really interested in moving from from a statement to action, and I think that the ESSER funded positions have done that, and I think that there is some, as I've kind of tried to find a way to get to something different, I've come back to those community services and recreational program that we provided is doing some of that work, like looking at the access that we've created and the growth in participation by people who did not participate in these programs before has been impressive. And in some ways we tried something and it worked, and I don't think that we can keep all of it, but I think that there's some wisdom in keeping some of it. While I'm uncomfortable to some extent with changing that expectation, I do see the wisdom in it. Likewise, I think having dedicated funding for language access and for some form of community engagement around equity is critical. I don't know that the mediated community voices program is the right tool. I think that city tours, which has been fleshed out and discussed and proposed before, would also be another way to do something similar. But I think that bringing on an equity director without those resources to affect some of the work that they want to do would also recreate a failure that we've already had in that program or in that position, or a obstacle that position encountered of having a lot of mandate and very few resources at their disposal. So I think that if we're going to find a way to keep an equity or to keep the equity director position, that has to come with resources. I think it's telling that we haven't gotten a single application for a housing initiative director. The equity audit identified housing is probably the most critical lever we can pull at the city solely on our own. I think that we need to get that one right. And if we don't, then we're failing at a thing that our community has told us to do, that our equity audit has told us to do, and that we hear regularly from residents today and before that we need to do, is get on our housing work. And we're keeping it together, and Heather was really great at doing that work on a limited amount of time, and I think we could really do more with that. If we're not going to get a candidate at 30 hours, we need to rethink that decision. My proposal is to move the housing director back to 40 hours a week, to cut the second circulation assistant for for the library, and to add in interpretation at the polls and at quarterly meetings as budget items. That would take us to a 5.15% tax rate increase, which is above our 5.0. We could buy that back down, to remove the community mediated voices program. That brings us to 5.15. We could allocate additional ARPA funds, or we could just accept that a 5.15% increase in a 7 to 8% inflation world is not that crazy. I'll stop talking now.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for letting me ramble on.
Bryn?
I agree with Jim on a number of things. I have concerns about returning to an equity director position when the tools are not in place, and the issues that were raised by Yasmin have not been addressed. Don't want to recruit somebody that also is not set up in a place for success. I want to note that the housing manager position has also just been posted in Burlington. So we likely would have some competition of interest from that municipality. I really do see a need to retain the youth interventionist. From our listening sessions multiple times, it's been indicated how essential that is to to ensuring supports for our youth are stable and in place. So I think it looks like in this tool it's pausing altogether. I think maintaining at least, I think it was the reduced 12 hours from 28. Is that? So maintaining a reduced 12 hours at a minimum rather than pausing the position entirely. I haven't done the math, so I apologize. Given that we just heard this last meeting about the desperate need to have more feelings of connection in the community and the increased interest of utilizing the O'Brien Center, I think there is value to ensuring that we have a mechanism, we have the supports to allowing rentals for that space. Again, we have no sense of when any turnover in that property may or may not happen. And so ensuring access to that space in the interim feels like it's worthwhile to maintain a role that will ensure access to that position. I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Aurora?
Right. So I would be in agreement with Councillor Oakley that the youth interventionist position and maintaining that might be our most critical. And I would argue at the 28 hours. And if we do have this additional 74K, that might help build that, or to use if we're gonna if you put 40 or bring the housing director back up to 40, that still, like I said, leaves about 18, almost 19K that could help be rolled into that. So maybe not back up to, I believe it was 20, but to kind of even that out. The other item that I will continue to state is of utmost importance is the equity director position, and I would like to address some of the concerns that have been brought up both by staff and by council. One of the items though I do want to start with is the budget as presented has told our community that as soon as money gets short, when times are tough, that we will cut equity and community services. So I want to say that that is concerning to me, that is kind of our first choice. As for the equity director position specifically, I think it is short-sighted to cut that position when instead we could think about ways to make it sustainable. For example, Elaine brought up the equity director could meet with constituents. I don't necessarily agree with that. If we re-looked at that job description and made it more internal facing, like our housing initiatives director, say an equity initiatives director position, we could find a way to make it sustainable. I also want to point out that the situation Yaz was in is not the situation we have now, where Yaz was working without having a city manager and in part without having an HR director. So that is some very specific staffing increases. Another item is that Elaine and leadership have been doing work since Yaz has left that position. And I think it would, I don't want our city manager to kind of discount their effort that they have put towards making things better. I also am concerned with this idea of not having that expertise. It feels short-sighted in that, like, it would be blinding us, like, if we didn't have Angela to tell us about financial goals, if we didn't have someone kind of, yes, each of our directors and leadership level are doing budget work. That is key to their jobs. But Angela's there as a expert, a content expert. So thinking about that director position as a content expert is key. I agree that it needs additional support and that the youth interventionist is one of those supports. Having that community outreach that the other leadership is doing would be a support and would take some of that pressure off. Some other items that are currently in place, we have the Inclusion and Belonging Commission now, much like with the housing position, having that is both a support to that position and that position is a support to the work of that commission. So I see that as key. Really being able to keep an eye on the big picture. I think dismissing the fact that we can't make a position that is equitable and sustainable and take all of the concerns that Yaz has brought up and put that into use to making a more equitable position. This is a discredit to all the work that she did in making the city more equitable and also all the work that has been done since to make the city more equitable. I also don't like this, what has come up of like, now is not the time for an equity director, that the city isn't ready. What is that telling our staff of color and our residents of color and other residents who face discrimination, that we're saying we're not ready for equity? That's what they're hearing, even if that's not the intention. So having that position, and again, making sure that it has the supports, that whoever is in that position can say no and has the supports and resources to do other work. But if they were there to, be that guidance of Elaine Christine asked us asked the council members for areas they would prioritize after we had our equity training. And my argument to that is, where can't we prioritize equity? There's equity in where we plant trees. There's equity in where we are plowing. There's equity in the books that we have in our library. Equity is a key part of every single one of our positions. That is clear, and we need to support that. But we also need an equity director to have that content expertise to say, help our housing initiatives director, to be that person who can advise council on areas of policy that can be worked on and improved to limit harm. Because that's the other thing, is this work is going to be done anyway, right? It's being done by Elaine and it's being done by other people in the city. That is key, we still need that. But it's also like the equity director level work is often also being done, but it's not being compensated. So I think as council, we need to think about what is sustainable for our city manager and for our city staff when we take away having that content expertise. And so I think, I just want to reiterate that I think it is very short-sighted to eliminate a position that we had once and not try and do better, not taking that as a learning experience and not say, actually, we're going to take a pause on this work. Because as someone who's worked in organizations that run on very short budgets, if you pause a position, it's gone. And I want to ask our council if we want to vote to pause this position and see that never come back. Because I think there's always going to be arguments of why we can't afford equity or why equity is the first thing that falls off. Equity is a key service. It's just as key service as every other work the city is doing. And I think if we think that it's something that can just be held on its own, we aren't going to progress forward. So I know that this is something that I have been kind of pushing it back since the beginning, and I have I have 11 points here, so I'm not going to get into all of them, because I think we should keep this position and then return to it and discuss, as we did with the housing position, exactly how this position could best work in our city, that makes it sustainable for the person in that position, and also ensures that we still have that content expertise. So I think we should find a way to have the equity director in our budget. I number one think that. I think if we can't do that, I think we should set aside money from ARPA to fund the position or to fund a department for 3 to 5 years, either looking at sustainable funding source or have the position look for grants. Or otherwise, my third option, I think we should have this in the budget or find another way to fund it. And I think if this council can't agree on those items, we should put it to our residents and add this position as a separate ballot item and have Winooski residents vote on if they will have that additional funds to fund that equity director as part of the ballot. So they will see how much money the budget is, and then they will see how much more they would be coming out of taxes that would go towards funding that position. Those are my main items.
Thanks, Aurora. I'll share my thoughts and then I'll summarize what is on the table for us.
I've already thought some thoughts too.
Go for it, Thomas.
Okay, cool. I think I'm seconding and thirding Councilor Oakleaf and Councilor Duncan with the youth interventionist and recreation assistant position. I do agree, especially from what I've heard from residents, as what Ray wrote up for us, the severe impact that they have had. So I would like to include those. Position that hasn't been spoken about tonight is the senior center director being moved to full-time. We've all attended meetings at the senior center where our seniors feel like they're extremely not listened to, and I think as we talk about equity, that includes our seniors as well, and I think they're often forgotten between all of the great programs that we provide for children and we provide for other groups. I know that the seniors feel like they are not listened to and they have a lot of asks from the city in terms of funding, but one that they seem to all kind of stand behind is funding this senior center director to go from a part-time position to a full-time position. So I would advocate for that as well. And then kind of my original it's too much to talk about to fund, but I feel like I'd like to, especially because you brought it up, Christine, the unfunded documents page. I think we really need to think about our water lines. That's a huge amount of money that we're gonna have to pay at some point. I don't know, again, I'm not a city budget expert, but I don't know if that's something we can start setting money aside for with incremental raises, even starting within this budget. And then going back to our last presentation, again, probably not for this budget, but the two of the things that the chiefs presented, I think I found quite alarming, but the sleeping quarters that the fire chief requested, I think will, enable him to provide much better service to the city as well as attracting people to come and work for the fire service. And then the police chief spoke about, and I don't even think he actually asked for, but their number ratios in terms of responses, needing 2 people to respond to emergencies and the need for a third person. I've heard from residents, I've experienced myself, the wait times of not having enough police on staff. Again, it's probably not something we discussed for this budget, but I do think we need to think about those requirements as well. And then to second what Aurora was saying, I would be quite favorable to supporting the equity director through ARPA. They were originally grant funded, so I feel like ARPA is, at the end of the day, a grant that we receive from the government. 2 to 3 years, not using all of ARPA towards it, or a huge amount. But I think giving that equity director, which isn't uncommon in many positions, the time to find other grants to fund their position, I think if we funded it for a few years, it would give them that opportunity.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we have $3 to $5 million in looming costs coming up what you just pointed out, real staffing issues in public safety, which I think we're going to be dealing with next year. It sounds to me like those are hitting ahead. We've been hearing about that for several years now. I think we have less control over emergencies that we need to respond to as a city than supporting programs that we create. So I am concerned about how much we increase this year and how much we are pre-committing for next year when there's going to be increasing inflation and these new needs. I similarly feel, I think the budget that's been proposed actually puts a ton of investment in both equity and community services. We are nearly doubling the community services department resourcing in this proposal. I agree that the foundational work of some type of community engagement program, be that mediated city tours, something, that and then the direct access and service being provided by staff in our community services department creates a foundation that would be useful when we rehire for an ED role in the future. We can't do everything all at once, as I said earlier, and I think we are putting a lot of investment in the area of equity right now, and starting at this ground level items helps us build up for more capacity in the future. I think for me, from the expansion of community services in ESSER, what's really stood out is the childcare access and what that does for community members. Also looking at like what Ray put together for us about how these positions support whatever, how like removal of anyone would change things. I see a lot of value in the like registration support and access side of the work. So I'm supportive of retaining the 8 additional hours for the Children and Family Program Manager and the Admin and Outreach Coordinator. I would also pause on the Circulation Assistant and potentially the Rec Assistant. With the sort of like new revenue that you have illuminated us to this evening, I would support bringing the Housing Initiative Director back to 40. I think this is a scenario where we don't have any other expertise on staff. Like no one else is doing housing, which is what makes it feel to me like this position is more urgent, also because of the equity audit directives. So,
Christine, do you mind if I do an asterisk there? We do have staff working on housing quality, not the type of initiatives that are.
Thank you very much. Housing quality is happening, yes.
I think the planning and zoning feeds into the housing work as well. So, but there's no one who's focused on it from an initiative or policy area, like at the broad scale. I agree.
So we've all said our piece. Let's find a way to see this.
Could I push back on?
Can we not debate yet?
No, it's not debate. I'm just concerned about, so yes, we are leadership, but ultimately what we vote on is going to go to the community to have their final say. So we could, put forward an increase, like acknowledge the fact that we've kept taxes so low for so long, and that has created a buildup in addition to inflation. So we could come to them with a higher than 5%. Not saying that I want to, but then they can tell us what they think, right? So I don't want to be like paternalistic, maternalistic of being like, we are your high and mighty authority, this is what is best for you. So I want to keep that in mind too, of like, yes, we're here for the community, but also they get another chance to say.
I mean, but that's our job.
Yes.
Is to put together, like, what we have to do is propose a budget and they get to vote on it. I think that is, yes, that is true. And I think like doubling the community services general fund commitment is our message. Like this is where we have chosen to focus our equity work, and investing in a housing initiative director is where we've chosen to focus our equity work. And I really don't, I'm not gonna debate, but I think we gotta separate equity director from equity work. There's a program of work we're doing in this community that is broader than one person and should be and has to be and currently is, and has been progressing without that position. Could be progressing better probably with that position, but doesn't mean that we're not doing it. And I think that to tell that message is not to say that without the equity director, we are not doing equity work is disingenuous to all the hard work that is currently happening that explicitly addresses equity. And I think I would like to see this debate distinguish between those two things, the director and the work. And that we really got to recognize this is this is a huge investment in community services, this budget.
After it's been underfunded for many, many years. So I think there's that too of like, is it a big investment or are we finally meeting a need that has been there before then?
That's true, but we also have some of the highest tax rates in the county, and that is a narrative. It is the truth, and we have a high tax rate already. So it's not that we have low taxes and we're trying to get up there. It's like we already have high taxes because of our peculiar arrangement and geography, and we are a full service city that provides full police, full fire, no EMS, and full community services, and a combined school district. Like we do it all in our little 1.6 square miles, and we don't have $300,000 for every penny on the tax rate. We get 50, and I think we gotta So I don't think it's a question of under investment and low tax rates. I think it's that we already are high tax. We're trying to keep increases low. This increase is already higher than what we're seeing in neighboring communities, percentage wise as well. So I mean, we're really stuck, and I think we got to be honest about what we're investing in, and we are making a trade-off. It's a choice, and we can put that to the voters, and they could decide this budget is too community services heavy and needs to go more to equity director. Like that could be a decision that voters make, but I think that should be made as part of the budget decision.
Thanks, Jim. Angela, would you be willing to bring up the tool for us, please?
Absolutely. So you should be able to see the tool now, is that correct?
Yes.
This is currently set up with the 5% tax increase that we had sent out in the packet. If there are any changes you want to see, we can make those.
Yeah, let me tell you all the ads that were voiced, and so we can see that total. So the first one would be say no to reducing the housing director and no to pausing the equity director. No to pausing youth interventionist. Maybe yes to the reduce youth interventionist. No to eliminate, okay. No to that. What are other additions? Oh, the mediated voices program, can you add that in?
So mediated voices is turned on, but I did hear interpreters from Jim.
Yeah, for the polls?
And quarterly meetings.
And quarterly meetings? Did I capture all the ads that were raised? Oh, the senior center. So this is, the ARPA money still in there. Is the LOT, the increased local options tax, included?
The increased local options tax is included.
Okay.
The use of ARPA is currently set at $363,000.
Put it to 409. Okay. So this is what we're looking at if we took everybody's ads, right? We took the staff proposal and added everything in. This is a 7% increase. 184.
Your average household probably is going to see an annual increase of $245.70 for a $300,000 value home.
And we'll have to raise taxes again next year for that $409,000 of ARPA on top of any increasing costs an inflation and any new needs?
Only if you don't consider the influx of tip dollars.
Oh, right. Well,
So
yeah, it's offsetting the TIF, that's right.
it's offsetting the tip. So I did add something to this tool so that if you exceeded the amount available from the tip, you would see the delayed amount of tax increase here in this potential fund balance use.
Oh, thank you.
Can we talk about the regional dispatch?
Yeah?
So I wanted to revisit it specifically because, Mayor, you brought up last time that you would not support removing this item because it was backed by the voters. I wanted to bring up my feeling that I don't believe regional dispatch as it currently exists is what our voters, what they voted on. Because there's no Shelburne, they voted it down. There's no Milton or Colchester, who both dropped out, and there's no Williston Police. So that is no longer regional. It's pretty much a if we were part of it, a 3.5 local town. I know that there are other things like involved in kind of considerations of the regional dispatch, but I'm worried that I don't want to like go down the route too of like the sunk cost fallacy of like, I know we've been doing this since 2015, but it is no longer what we like as it was originally presented, and it seems to continuously cost Winooski more than it was proposed to save. So we're no longer kind of getting that regional, that aspect, that benefit of being tied in with the other cities and towns in the region, and it's continuing to cost us more. So I would be in favor of removing that, as well as then removing the police admin position. And I don't even think us doing that would, quote unquote, kill this project. We might be able to come back to it if others also come back to it. So I don't know, it just feels like Winooski is spending a lot of money on a service that is no longer what our voters agreed to.
I'm going to disagree with that because the vote never said all those communities would be included. It was always known that each community voted in on their own. So that's what people understood going into it. It's also, it was not voted on for cost savings. It was voted on to reduce response times, improving public safety, and to improve the situation of dispatch staff.
So until Colchester pulled out, we were still projecting savings as well, eventually. So, and then the expectation of refunds for any costs that the initial communities that involved in standing it up would incur until it was ready for, prime time, so to speak. So my feeling is that if there came to be a time when it was gonna cost Winooski more, I would come back to you or the voters or both and say, maybe we shouldn't continue. But, there's other considerations, obviously, if there's service quality. I'm not saying that the cost is the only thing. But again, I don't know the answer to that question yet, or whether or not it will cost Winooski more. We don't know that. Unfortunately, the timing isn't great. You're looking at a bad budget decision without that knowledge, but we don't actually know whether it will or not cost Winooski more.
We did do an analysis. Part of the issue with next fiscal year in terms of affordability is that it was not projected to stand up until October, and the costs were still estimated to be $321, which is the annual cost. So we were still going to have some costs for the dispatchers for the first 4 months of the year, which we would not have in future years.
Staying on some of that topic for a second, so who would do the work of the records clerk if we are not keeping that position?
If we go to regional dispatch and there's no records clerk, the police officers would have to do it. And that's a lot.
What's the likelihood of regional dispatch being stood up in FY24?
Well, I'll say that Burlington has to do something and South Burlington wants to do something. I mean, it's not different from what I told you before. My feeling is that kind of what Councilor Hurd was alluding to, those are the two dogs wagging the collective tail, you know?
Right.
So my guess is something will happen. Whether or not that something will then be charged us at a rate that we're expecting, I have no idea.
And is it actually gonna give us that faster response time?
I mean, potentially, and, you know, given that we have some challenges now, I wouldn't want you to close that door until we knew for a fact it wasn't going to be delivered on.
It also increases the depth of the bench for dispatchers during emergencies, that you can still take calls during a major event, which we currently, there's one dispatcher sitting in the chair if there's a major event and they're trying to field other informational calls at the same time. It can be a very stressful and potentially dangerous situation.
So one thing I asked and didn't get a response on, I'm just recalling, is what if Winooski went in just for fire? Did something similar to Williston?
So, Angela and John or Rick, feel free to jump in, but my sense is that it would be more expensive because we'd be covering what you currently have in the police department and more service.
Okay. Are there, because it sounds like regional dispatch, it's just going to be whatever South Burlington puts together, do we have to do that full amount?
I don't know what the estimates are gonna be, so I couldn't tell you. Somebody who was, had a better background in estimating staffing costs and this kind of hard costs might be able to estimate, but I'm afraid I don't have that.
Fair enough. It seems just a lot of it's a lot of money for a lot of uncertainty when there's so much need for those
They're not
funds
wrong.
in other areas. So I don't know, it feels like a big question mark where we're like, we directly know where other money would go to that would directly benefit our residents and or our staff capacity.
So, from what all was proposed from folks, it sounds like there's some general agreement on the Housing Initiative Director to 40, Youth Interventionist, retaining most of the community services roles, potentially removing the circulation assistant, some funding for community engagement, mediated voices. These are the areas where I heard more than one person say that they were on board.
I do agree with Jim about interpreters of the polls.
That has been added.
Okay, great.
So it sounds like the only removal that was proposed by more than one person is the circulation assistant. Okay, Angela, let's align on what we're looking at again.
Okay,
Okay, so can you start back at the top?
sure.
Let's put pause equity director back to yes. Leave the housing director at no. Leave the youth interventionist as is. The circ assistant eliminated. We're keeping the other things. St. Michael's amendment, we want that, right? Because that's what shifts us from 47 to 9,000?
Correct.
Okay.
Saves us 9,000.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah.
Do the math
okay.
in my head, yeah.
Yeah. We got the new revenues there. Okay, and then scrolling down, we have the mediated voices and,
to interpreters, items, the records clerk, and then the senior center to full-time.
take that one out, please. Okay.
This is with the use of $409,000 of ARPA. It's less than 5% tax increase.
Could we put the youth interventionist to the current hours?
I went with the reduced hours because that was, you shared full, Bryn shared it at reduced. Thomas, what, you didn't specify.
Full.
And I was actually advocating for pause.
I am advocating for pause too, which is why I figured middle would be the reduced hours.
Could we just see it though?
We
If
can
we're
see it.
currently at 4.85. And see it,
At full 28 hours, that's projected right now, 5.2% increase with the use of $409,000 of ARPA.
Can we put it back the other way, Angela?
The 12 hours,
Yeah.
4.85%.
And don't you need to put pause youth interventionist back to yes? Or is that not how that works, that calculation?
If I do that, you're actually going to see a lovely little red flag come up that says you can't have both of those things.
I see, okay. That's why they're in the
You
box.
can't cut the same money twice.
And is this,
Like Daisy has raised her hand.
Paul, did you bring her over?
Hey, I just want to say, because I noticed somebody zeroed in on that second circulation assistant at the library. I'm going to speak up about that one because when that position came on, I noticed there was a significant difference in the programming at the library. And so I would just caution you as you make that change or consider making it, then the impact that has on the number of people who come through the library, not only the number of people that impacts, but also the quality of services in our library. When someone has to balance being at the desk or being in the back, actually working hands-on with kids, it's an incredible impact. I would be really, really sad to see that position made.
Thanks, Daisy.
Angela, is this still with ARPA at 409?
Yes, it is.
Could we reduce that back to the 363 or whatever?
Do you want to bring it to 5% tax rate increase, see what that number is?
Yeah, let's see that too.
It's going to be Angela guessing for a minute.
Yeah.
Triangulating. Almost.
Roughly 400,000. Yeah. $399.5 gets you to 5% with that second third assistant remaining cut.
So, you know, based on what we each put forward, this is where we find alignment. But now is an opportunity for any additional debate.
Can we just have a minute so I can,
By all means, yeah.
thanks. I just want to scroll through everything again.
Brenda, do you mind if I say something while you're okay? We haven't talked about it, but I don't know how the rest of council feels about the potential of using ARPA funds to fund the equity director.
Yeah, we can discuss that. I think we've already gotten ourselves in a less than ideal place from using grant money to fund positions ongoing. And I still believe that we are doing, with this proposal, we are doing a lot of foundational groundwork that's necessary that's going to better support that position in the future. But it's certainly not just up to me.
I do want to flag for you that 67,797 is not the annual cost for the equity director. That is net of removing a revenue as well. The actual cost of the position is $117,797.
I think the way I was thinking, and I don't want to speak for Aurora, but you can chime in. I believe last time we met, we talked about having 1.4 million left over after using the amount that we're already going to use to buy down the tax rate. So at sorry Angela, you said 100 and something thousand. So if we
Currently 117, but remember that would inflate as well every fiscal year.
So I think if we funded that position using ARPA for 2 to 3 years, we would still have just over $1 million to use, which is a good chunk of money. It's not the biggest chunk of money, but I think it's still a good amount of ARPA funds to use to fund whatever we decide we want to use ARPA on. I know it's maybe not exactly what we had thought of for ARPA, but again, this is a position that I think a lot of members of the community think is really important, and it was grant funded in the beginning. ARPA is government money at the end of the day that we weren't expecting to ever have. I know that we could get in the position again, but I think that by having these conversations about how we are planning to fund this position and the need for that position to find their own grants, I would feel much more comfortable personally if in 3 years we're in a similar position and we can't fund it. We've laid out the expectation of how this position gets funded.
That would mean that we're using 50% of ARPA to fund operations. Just be aware of that.
No, it's definitely something I don't think I would have initially considered. Every town's using it differently. Some towns have just used it straight up for infrastructure. Others are still waiting to figure out what to do with it. Each town's needs for ARPAs are different, and Winooski, as always, is a very different city than everybody else.
Elaine, you wanted to?
So I haven't had a chance to discuss with any of you, but staff recommendation on use of ARPA is to wait until the Main Street bids come in, because there is the danger that they might be higher. I cannot guarantee that, and again, it's unfortunate that the timing is working out, that you don't know if we're being able to make an informed decision about that proposal. But that is a possibility.
I think we could wait for that and have this discussion again still. If the proposal to use ARPA on the ED role doesn't have to be made at the same time as this.
That's true.
So there is the just reflecting back on the memo of the let me get there, the unfunded needs. Those are not insignificant. And Angela, do you have a estimated total for all those together? Is that at the top?
Unfunded, I don't know that it came with one.
I don't know that I included an overall total because it was spread across 15 different funds.
I copied it out of the document.
Okay.
So it was 3.35 in general fund and then 15 in water, wastewater.
Without the ones without estimates.
That's just the ones where we have dollars assigned, yeah. And then there are a dozen
Those
plus.
are, in general, the ones with cost estimates were for the most part one-time capital expenses for projects rather than annual ongoing costs.
So it's just, it's cautionary to use one-time funds for operational needs. And so I have to caution us with, it's unclear if we'll be able to access this same amount of money in the future, where we don't have the same grant reporting needs. We know that's a burden on our staff. It's time intensive to apply for. And trying to, poke at projects and reducing those costs. We already have a number of different grants that we're chasing after for some of the larger projects, but it's just, you know, we gotta, I just recommend looking at it cohesively, a time, resources, capacity, because we're hearing time and time again where that's one of the greatest struggles from, you know, looking at the community mediation, you know, $10,000 for that, but that's still being resource intensive. So I just have to caution about using one-time funds for operations.
Thank you for mentioning that, Brent, because using the one-time funding and reserves for operational costs is actually against our existing fund balance reserve policy that was approved by council. That does really recommend that those types of monies be used for either one-time costs or operating costs that have an identified future source that's coming in the future and is known.
I think given the uncertainties with the SRO position, I don't know what will happen with the school budget this year in that position, and the likely of 8 to higher % increase on construction bid prices that we're seeing in other places, I think it behooves us to wait until June to make these decisions about one-time funds, at least.
I agree.
It would be, I won't be here in June to have any regrets, but I'll still be a resident.
You'll be a regretful resident.
I'll be a regretful resident when we can't do Main Street because we can't make the total cost because of the bond amount. So I just don't want to see that happen. And if ARPA is a way to avoid that, I think that's prudent to wait. And to the point of that decision about the equity director and using these one-time funds for that purpose, whether or not we change our policies to allow it, still does not need to be made tonight or next Monday.
Can I ask what council would think of including the equity director as a separate ballot item?
I'd like to start on that, Aurora, because we talked about this, and initially I was interested in the idea of putting it to voters. But the more I've reflected on it, I don't think it's a good idea. I think it puts voters too in the weeds of operations. You know, when we had Heather leave the CEDO role, leadership determined that role wasn't meeting our needs anymore and pivoted it to this housing initiative director. I think having voters vote on individual staff takes away that flexibility and responsiveness. And it's also a bad precedent. Like, do we need to vote to retain a zoning administrator? Do we need to vote to add this housing initiative director? I think it's weird. I think it can be weird to say we need voters to tell us whether to have this ED role, but nothing else.
Well, it is, as keep bringing up, a grant-funded position that came out of community need and want. So it is slightly different in that way. I also feel like we have heard a lot of community feedback on it, and I don't know,
I do want to clarify how this role came to be, actually. So we had the Equity Summit several years ago with city, school, and community members. There's a series of dialogues after that, and what came out of those discussions from community members was the Inclusion and Belonging Commission, the city tours, and the school liaison, expansion of that. The equity director role came from the small working group within the grant saying we need someone to manage those initiatives. So it's not directly what community asked for. They asked for these other programs that we are starting to make progress on. I think having that role in the future to support them makes sense, but there is just not room in the budget right now for it, in my opinion.
I don't see that ever changing. that there isn't, if we're not going to prioritize it, there is never going to be the money for it, right?
I guess just to pose a slightly different perspective on that, I've spent a great portion of my career working in state government, and it's very common for the executive branch to get authorized from the legislative branch an FTE or a number of FTEs. And then because there's a requirement for level funding for whatever, this has happened within the last 5 years, 5 to 10 years for the executive branch, where the budgets were imbalanced. The executive branch, usually when they get authorized an FTE, they want to retain it. And they don't want to have to relinquish that back into the legislative general fund for it to be reallocated. So from the executive branch side of things, it's really common for positions to be put on hold or to be frozen so that the budget can then be balanced so that the position can be refilled. So I guess I've just seen it and experienced it from a different perspective.
I would say we also add staff. We've added staff to previous budgets. We're kind of doing that here, right? Like, we'll be adding staff next year. Next year could be when this position fits back in. I think to Bryn's point, it's a practice of we put things on pause and then we bring it back when we can.
So I think I don't think overall and generally speaking, it's a desire of any of us to pause this position. I think we're looking at an extremely challenging budget, and I honestly was a little relieved to hear you say you haven't experienced this since you've been on council, because I'm like, this is like nothing it was last year.
Yeah.
This is definitely a level of stress I didn't think that would be coming, considering that we have had a significant amount of federal funding. But we're looking at two forces colliding. Yes, we are getting some increase in federal funding. However, that's not keeping up with inflation. It's not keeping up with so many of our other obligations to meet our salaries and benefits, and to try and also maintain the valuable services that the community wants at the same time. It's extremely challenging.
I also think, we're hiding the true cost of this investment, and I think that should be part of our budget presentation. This is a 12% increased budget, but we're keeping the tax rate to 5%. Or I don't know what the right proportion is, but we also got to be honest about that and say we're going to grow our government 12% this year, and it's going to show us.
Now, if I remove ARPA, your budget is an 11.46% increase.
Tax rate increase, and that's not even budget increase. So I think we got to be clear that we're dithering over 5.1 versus 5.5. This is a 12% or 11.5% budget increase, and we're addressing inflation. We're trying to keep the burden off of taxpayers using one-time funds, bridging to development funds. I think we've done a good balance there, and I think we got to be thinking about what we're expanding, and I think communicating that choosing to make an increased investment over inflation is in community services and the ESSER funded positions and making those permanent. And I still think making good on some of the recommendations from the years of equity work, which is language access, all resident voting. We've done things that we need to follow through on as well, and I think that's where we need to prioritize money.
So I haven't heard anyone really change positions. Again, what we have here is moving the housing initiative director up to 40, retaining the reduced youth interventionist, retaining community services admin and rec assistant and the children and family program manager, including the mediated voices community engagement and interpretation funding, and then removing the second circulation assistant, and including ARPA to reach 5.
could we try bringing the ARPA back to the 490 and bring the
409?
yeah
409.
yes, sorry, and put the circulation assistant back.
$5.06.
Curses.
Do we have some consensus around this?
Yeah, I don't think. We never said the increase has to be 5%, right? Like
It doesn't have to be.
5.06 could be it.
Yeah, the 5% number was as a result of the Finance and Municipal Infrastructure Commission meeting, where they indicated 5% could be something that they would see as agreeable. But this is marginally different than a 5% increase. So $300,000 home is an increase of $180.60 a year versus $178.50.
It's not a huge.
So it's $2.10 difference per year to your average taxpayer.
And using 10 grand of reserves. That was the difference between these two, was 399 and 409.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Roughly, yeah.
Is it just Jim and I who were on board with removing one position?
Can I play around with it one more time?
To what ends? What are you trying to add?
Thinking about bringing, again, the youth interventionist back up. So one of the things that I'm holding is that I went to, I was very graciously allowed to kind of sit in and listen to a community circle that happened, probably a month or so ago, in which some of our staff were engaging with the budget as originally presented. And one of the things I took away from that was that for our library staff, the youth interventionist position is hugely important to them. And making sure that they feel like they're doing what they need to really help our community. So again, considering their teeny tiny space and that it's, only two full-time people who aren't paid a whole lot, thinking about, making sure that they have the resources they need to use that kind of their resources to the best of their ability. So balancing the circulation assistant, which, as we heard from a community member, is a huge support towards freeing up kind of their time to do work, like look for other funds and present programming, versus a youth interventionist, which also is very important to them and important to other aspects of the community and our equity work. So just seeing if it's a similar small percentage over, or portion of a percentage over 5% between the two.
So turn back on the eliminating of the second circ assistant and keeping the youth interventionist as is?
Yeah.
Permanent?
Yeah.
$5.2.
How much more is that then? Sorry.
It's $4.80 more than if the youth interventionist was reduced and we kept the second circ assistant, roughly, for an average home.
So $2 versus $6?
It's $6 on top of that $2. So.
Okay, so $2 versus $8.
I just wonder which of those two positions is more consequential to library operations. If that's what we're trying to.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, Ray.
Hello. So yeah, they, as Aurora said, I think both really important in very different ways, right? So to Daisy's point earlier, I think having that second circ assistant has really freed Nate and Kirsten up from spending time sitting at that desk, checking out books and doing administrative tasks, and kind of opened them up to doing more resource seeking, program development, program delivery, community outreach. Kirsten actually does a lot of time out in the community as well. She goes to daycare centers, Thrive, etc. So I think some of those programmatic pieces would have to scale back realistically if a circ assistant were not added. I will say too, I think the youth interventionist position, and I've said this in my presentation, it's hard for me to imagine a 10 to 12 hour position in that role being successful, candidly. And not because there's a lack of need, but I think recruitment for a 10 to 12 hour position of that nature would be really tough. And I think realistically the caseload, the volume of folks you could support, I think I've mentioned in my presentation, it's probably 1 to 2 clients at a time versus right now 4 to 5. So I think if the youth interventionists were to be retained, I don't want to say there's no value in having that shortened staff time, but I think the preference from an operational standpoint would be to have the full 28-hour youth interventionist and forego some of those programmatic components in the library. And again, that's an impossible and icky decision for me to have to sit here in real time and make. But I guess what I would say is I can see ways for us to supplement what's lost with a second circulation assistant, more so than I could see ways for us to, you can't get a volunteer to be a youth interventionist, for instance. Potentially we could look at, youth training programs or volunteer programs to bring in some extra circ support. So I think if I had to choose operationally one or the other, I think the 28 hours of youth interventionist would be preferable to the circ assistant.
Thanks, Ray.
For whatever that's worth.
Can I ask another question related to ESSER, just on the related supplies? How would you balance that operationally, the ESSER related supplies line?
Say that again.
How would you balance the ESSER related supplies line, cutting that compared to the rec assistant and the...
Okay, Angela, can you remind me how much, I don't remember how much is carried in that.
6,000.
I believe it's
10,000.
10 is what's listed there for ESSER related supplies.
It's a hard one in real time without a spreadsheet in front of me to answer. I think, could we figure out ways to trim that back? Probably yes. I think one of the things that it would limit our ability to do is to bring in new programs. We'd be kind of stuck working with the equipment and materials that we have by and large. And so it does, I think, hamper flexibility and creativity for staff. Sure. But is the department going to implode if that number shrinks down? No. But I think it would definitely require us to think differently about how we're bringing new programs in and if we're bringing new programs in.
So in similar to previous discussions, if we're to keep the rec assistant but cut the supplies, you can offer this full slate of programming as long as it's exactly the same as what we've done before and nothing breaks.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, generally I think the people are the more critical limiting factor than the stuff.
Yeah.
I think there's always, there's ways to figure out the stuff. Again, I'm not advocating for that cut, but I think if push came to shove, that would be, I think the human capacity is more important.
Thanks.
I would propose reducing that. Again, it's like a pause, right? We don't bring new programming on this year, next year we can.
If we cut the circ assistant and 4K from the ESSER related supplies, that's the difference between a 28 and a 12-hour youth interventionist, according to this tool. So it's 21 savings for reducing to 12, and it's 38 for cutting entirely. So the delta for me there is 17,000. Circ assistant is 13. There's 10K in ESSER related. So if you were to reduce ESSER to 6, cut the circ assistant, you keep your youth interventionist at 28 hours, and that sounds like that combination has the most operational bang for the buck, from what I'm hearing. I know again, you have the spreadsheet, the same spreadsheet I do. I know that it's not a fair way to do this, but that's what I'm seeing in this right now. So I think if you make that negative 4,000 instead of negative 6 is what I was proposing. Oh, that's gonna increase it, never mind. My math stinks.
It's all the change in there.
Would council be amenable to that change? We reduce ESSER supplies and the circulation assistant, and then we retain the youth interventionist at the full 28?
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We're pausing the circ assistant, reducing the ESSER supplies, moving the housing initiative director to 40, retaining youth interventionist at 28, retaining the additional ESSER positions, adding interpretation support and mediated voices. Does someone want to, do you want to add something, Elaine?
Let's just wait until she's done.
Yeah, I was wondering if you wanted to take like a 3-minute break for Angela to check her.
Oh, that's a good
you.
idea. Okay, yeah, let's pause. It's 9:17.
We also don't need to vote on this tonight.
Well, I feel like we should vote so that what you bring back to us at the next meeting
Is it?
and moves forward.
So then I can definitely verify everything before your next meeting.
So one other proposal that we could consider reducing based off of capacity is the mediated community voice program. It made it sound earlier that 10,000 was potentially higher than what staff would even have capacity for.
Potentially, yeah.
So would reducing that to 8,000 feel like it's still gives you enough room?
I would say so. Like if you did it in half, that's assuming a meeting a week, which is still kind of a lot, frankly. It doesn't sound like much, but for us to absorb the
I
input.
think January feels like,
Is that?
if it feels like January, then I can understand.
There you go, yeah.
When Elaine and I had discussed this program and setting it at 10.5, we did acknowledge that that was going to be a lot of meetings, but if we didn't have as many meetings, it would free up the ability to provide translation, interpretation, or accessibility, or whoever is coming in to provide their voice to the program, to be able to access to us and so that we understand them fully.
I mean, Angela, would you disagree? Like cutting it by 2 or 2.5 feels like it's a pilot anyway, so.
It may not, we don't even know what it's gonna cost. This is a complete estimate, shot in the dark.
Right.
There might not be that many people who wanna come and talk to us.
Right, for the sake of shaving some, I don't think that's an unreasonable
So we can,
request.
so Angela, can you just show us what 8,000 would look like for that line item?
Not minus, that one's plus. Puts you down to 5.09%. And that's with still the second circ assistant being paused, keeping the youth interventionist at 28 and reducing ESSER related supplies by 4,000.
Given that it's a pilot, I feel like that may just be a little bit reasonable, and then
Yeah.
I'm on board with that.
Yeah.
I hear some agreement.
Okay.
Did we put this on for voting? No, just for discussion, but let's take a vote anyway.
struggle.
This is the budget we would like to see come back to us next week. Does someone want to make a
You're gonna have your
motion?
public hearing next week.
Yes.
Yeah. So moved.
Second.
Motion by Thomas, second by Bryn. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay, motion carries. And then we call the public hearing next week, right? Or do you need a vote on that tonight?
That, I believe, has already.
We already did that.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
Double check that.
I'm definitely jumpy these days when it comes to hearings and when they were warned.
If you want to vote on it, I don't think it would hurt.
All right, someone motion to hold a public hearing on the budget on January 23rd?
So moved.
Motion by Bryn, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, just for safety's sake.
Why not?
We are on to item D. This is our strategic vision area goal update for all areas.
Yes, and I just want to appreciate the hard work that council just went through. Obviously, staff had a lot to go on too, but I recognize this is a hard budget year. I did not like recommending the budget I recommended, but I do feel like you've exercised a lot of responsibility and diligence, so we appreciate that. So the goal update for all, in short, we're either underway on almost all items or have a plan to make some progress in this fiscal year. The one exception is the IT services bid, which we're now planning to bid in winter 2023, but we will still be, with that timeline, in compliance with our policies. Do you have any questions?
Elaine, you have a note in here about potentially asking the Regional Planning Commission for support around housing policy. I was just gonna make a suggestion that if there's some sort of gap fill here while we don't have that position filled, we could look to housing or planning to suggest things. Unless staff already has a list going.
Yeah, I have a substantial list that's based on what I've heard, but certainly welcome to more
Okay.
input on that. Yeah.
I think there is, like, if that's a viable path, there is a case to be made, like any work that they did is beneficial to the whole county and not just us.
Yeah, I ran my list by Charlie a few months ago, and there were some things they said, oh, yeah, this is fine, and some things, probably not. Anyway, yeah, there's some dialogue.
Okay. I was excited to see that maybe there's some capacity there while we have,
Yeah, and I'll give credit
maybe,
to John Audie for that
maybe.
idea.
Oh, excellent.
Elaine, can you remind me, the IT services bid, is that for remote IT services?
It does include remote services. It's we call them managed services, or they call it managed services in the industry. It's basically making sure that all of our stuff stays patched up to date, all of our networking is solid, any tech support that happens with any networking, but also our computers, and make sure individual workstations are working, and some printer support as well.
It's also our cloud server where all of our documents are housed is through that.
Email service, Outlook, or Office rather. Yep.
Perfect, thank you.
Does anyone else have questions on any items on here, progress?
Thoughts, but they wouldn't be coherent. So
Why not?
Save this for later.
No worries. I'll save them for later.
Any questions from the public? You're probably not looking at it though, the document? Okay. So this was only on for discussion. We have reached the end of this evening's agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Bryn, second by Thomas. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.